Chapter 27. The Story. First, sir, said Kadrouse, you must make me a promise. What is that? Inquired the abb. Why, if you ever make use of the details I am about to give you, that you will never let anyone know that it was I who supplied them. For the persons of whom I am about to talk are rich and powerful, and if they only laid the tips of their fingers on me, I should break to pieces like glass. Make yourself easy, my friend, replied the abb. I am a priest, and confessions die in my breast. Recollect, our only desire is to carry out, in a fitting manner, the last wishes of our friend. Speak, then, without reserve, as without hatred. Tell the truth, the whole truth. I do not know, never may know, the persons of whom you are about to speak. Besides, I am an Italian and not a Frenchman, and belong to God and not to man, and I shall shortly retire to my convent, which I have only quitted to fulfill the last wishes of a dying man. This positive assurance seemed to give Kadrouse a little courage. Well, then, under these circumstances, said Kadrouse, I evening believe I ought to undeceive you as to the friendship which poor Edmund thought so sincere and unquestionable. Begin with his father, if you please, said the abb. Edmund talked to me a great deal about the old man for whom he had the deepest love. The history is a sad one, sir, said Kadrouse, shaking his head. Perhaps you know all the earlier part of it? Yes, answered the abb. Edmund related to me everything until the moment when he was arrested in a small cabaret close to Marseille, at La Reserve. Oh, yes, I can see it all before me this moment. Was it not his betrothal feast? It was, and the feast that began so gaily had a very sorrowful ending. A police commissary, followed by 4 soldiers, entered, and Dantes was arrested. Yes, and up to this point I know all, said the priest. Dantes himself only knew that which personally concerned him, for he never beheld again the 5 persons I have named to you, or heard mention of any one of them. Well, when Dantes was arrested, Monsieur Morel hastened to obtain the particulars, and they were very sad. The old man returned alone to his home, folded up his wedding suit with tears in his eyes, and paced up and down his chamber the whole day, and would not go to bed at all, for I was underneath him and heard him walking the whole night, and for myself, I assure you I could not sleep either, for the grief of the poor father gave me great uneasiness, and every step he took went to my heart, as really as if his foot had pressed against my breast. The next day, Mercedes came to implore the protection of M. de Villefort. She did not obtain it, however, and went to visit the old man. When she saw him so miserable and heartbroken, having passed a sleepless night and not touched food since the previous day, she wished him to go with her that she may take care of him. But the old man would not consent. No, was the old man's reply. I will not leave this house, for my poor dear boy loves me better than anything in the world, and if he gets out of prison, he will come and see me the first thing, and what would he think if I did not wait here for him? I heard all this from the window, for I was anxious that Mercedes should persuade the old man to accompany her, for his footsteps over my head night and day did not leave me a moment's repose. But did you not go upstairs and try to console the poor old man? Asked the abb. Ah, sir, replied Kadrouse, we cannot console those who will not be consoled, and he was one of these. Besides, I know not why, but he seemed to dislike seeing me. One night, however, I heard his sobs, and I could not resist my desire to go up to him. But when I reached his door, he was no longer weeping but praying. I cannot now repeat to you, sir, all the eloquent words and imploring language he made use of. It was more than piety, it was more than grief, and I, who am no cantor, and hate the Jesuits, said then to myself, it is really well, and I am very glad that I have not any children, for if I were a father and felt such excessive grief as the old man does, and did not find in my memory or heart all he is now saying, I should throw myself into the sea at once, for I could not bear it. Poor father, murmured the priest. From day to day he lived on alone, and more solitary. Morel and Mercedes came to see him, but his door was closed, and although I was certain he was at home, he would not make any answer. One day, when, contrary to his custom, he had admitted Mercedes, and the poor girl, in spite of her own grief and despair, endeavored to console him, he said to her, "Be assured, my dear daughter, he is dead, and, instead of expecting him, it is he who is awaiting us. I am quite happy, for I am the oldest, and of course shall see him first. However well disposed a person may be, why, you see, we leave off after a time seeing persons who are in sorrow. They make one melancholy, and so at last old Dantes was left all to himself, and I only saw from time to time strangers go up to him and come down again with some bundle they tried to hide. But I guessed what these bundles were, and that he sold by degrees what he had to pay for his subsistence. At length the poor old fellow reached the end of all he had. He owed 3/4 rent, and they threatened to turn him out. He begged for another week, which was granted to him. I know this because the landlord came into my apartment when he left his. For the first 3 days I heard him walking about as usual, but on the fourth I heard nothing. I then resolved to go up to him at all risks. The door was closed, but I looked through the keyhole and saw him so pale and haggard that, believing him very ill, I went and told Morel and then ran on to Mercedes. They both came immediately, Morel bringing a doctor, and the doctor said it was inflammation of the bowels and ordered him a limited diet. I was there, too, and I never shall forget the old man's smile at this prescription. From that time he received all who came. He had an excuse for not eating any more. The doctor had put him on a diet. The abbe uttered a kind of groan. "The story interests you, does it not, sir?" inquired Cedros. "Yes," replied the abbe, "it is very affecting." Mercedes came again, and she found him so altered that she was evening, more anxious than before to have him taken to her own home. This was Morel's wish also, who would fain have conveyed the old man against his consent, but the old man resisted and cried so that they were actually frightened. Mercedes remained, therefore, by his bedside, and Morel went away, making a sign to the Catalan that he had left his purse on the chimney-piece. But availing himself of the doctor's order, the old man would not take any sustenance. At length, after 9 days of despair and fasting, the old man died, cursing those who had caused his misery, and saying to Mercedes, "If you ever see my Edmund again, tell him I die." Blessing him, the abbe rose from his chair, made 2 turns round the chamber, and pressed his trembling hand against his parched throat. "And you believe he died of hunger, sir?" "Of hunger," said Cedros. "I am as certain of it as that we too are Christians." The abbe, with a shaking hand, seized a glass of water that was standing by him half full, swallowed it at one gulp, and then resumed his seat, with red eyes and pale cheeks. "This was truly a horrid event," said he in a hoarse voice. "The more so, sir, as it was men's and not God's doing." "Tell me of those men," said the abbe, "and remember too," he added in an almost menacing tone, "you have promised to tell me everything. Tell me, therefore, who are these men who killed the son with despair and the father with famine?" "2 men jealous of him, sir, one from love and the other from ambition, Fernand and Danglars." "How was this jealousy manifested?" "Speak on." "They denounced Edmund as a Bonapartist agent." "Which of the 2 denounced him? Which was the real delinquent?" "Both, sir, one with a letter, and the other put it in the post." "And where was this letter written?" "At La Reserve, the day before the betrothal feast." "It was so, then, it was so, then," murmured the abbe. "Oh, Feria, Feria, how well did you judge men and things!" "What did you please to say, sir?" asked Cedros. "Nothing, nothing," replied the priest. Go on. It was Danglars who wrote the denunciation with his left hand, that his writing may not be recognized, and Fernand who put it in the post. But, exclaimed the abbe suddenly, you were there yourself. I, said Cedros, astonished. Who told you I was there? The abbe saw he had overshot the mark, and he added quickly, no one. But in order to have known everything so well, you must have been an eyewitness. True, true, said Cedros in a choking voice. I was there. And did you not remonstrate against such infamy? Asked the abbe. If not, you were an accomplice. Sir, replied Cedros, they had made me drink to such an excess that I nearly lost all perception. I had only an indistinct understanding of what was passing around me. I said all that a man in such a state could say, but they both assured me that it was a jest they were carrying on, and perfectly harmless. Next day, sir, you must have seen plain enough what they had been doing, yet you said nothing, though you were present when Dantes was arrested. Yes, sir, I was there, and very anxious to speak, but Danglars restrained me. If he should really be guilty, said he, and did really put into the island of Elba, if he is really charged with a letter for the Bonapartist committee at Paris, and if they find this letter upon him, those who have supported him will pass for his accomplices. I confess I had my fears in the state in which politics then were, and I held my tongue. It was cowardly, I confess, but it was not criminal. I understand you allowed matters to take their course, that was all. Yes, sir, answered Cedros, and remorse preys on me night and day. I often ask pardon of God, I swear to you, because this action, the only one with which I have seriously to reproach myself in all my life, is no doubt the cause of my abject condition. I am expiating a moment of selfishness, and so I always say to La Carconte when she complains, hold your tongue, woman, it is the will of God. And Cedros bowed his head with every sign of real repentance. Well, sir, said the abbe, you have spoken unreservedly, and thus to accuse yourself is to deserve pardon. Unfortunately, Edmond is dead and has not pardoned me. He did not know, said the abbe. But he knows it all now, interrupted Cedros. They say the dead know everything. There was a brief silence. The abbe rose and paced up and down pensively, and then resumed his seat. You have 2 or 3 times mentioned a M. Morel, he said. Who was he? The owner of the Pharaon and patron of Dantes. And what part did he play in this sad drama? Inquired the abbe. The part of an honest man, full of courage and real regard. 20 times he interceded for Edmond. When the emperor returned, he wrote, implored, threatened, and so energetically that on the second restoration he was persecuted as a Bonapartist. 10 times, as I told you, he came to see Dante's father and offered to receive him in his own house, and the night or 2 before his death, as I have already said, he left his purse on the mantelpiece with which they paid the old man's debts and buried him decently, and so Edmond's father died as he had lived, without doing harm to any one. I have the purse still by me, a large one made of red silk, and asked the abbe, is M. Morel still alive? Yes, replied Cedros. In that case, replied the abbe, he should be rich, happy. Cedros smiled bitterly. Yes, happy as myself, said he. What? M. Morel unhappy? Exclaimed the abbe. He is reduced almost to the last extremity. No, he is almost at the point of dishonor. How? Yes, continued Cedros, so it is, after 25 years of labor, after having acquired a most honorable name in the trade of Marseille, M. Morel is utterly ruined. He has lost 5 ships in 2 years, has suffered by the bankruptcy of 3 large houses, and his only hope now is in that very Pharaon which poor Dantes commanded, and which is expected from the Indies with a cargo of cochineal and indigo. If this ship founders, like the others, he is a ruined man. And has the unfortunate man wife or children? Inquired the abbe. Yes, he has a wife who through everything has behaved like an angel. He has a daughter who was about to marry the man she loved, but whose family now will not allow him to wed the daughter of a ruined man. He has, besides, a son, a lieutenant in the army, and as you may suppose, all this, instead of lessening, only augments his sorrows. If he were alone in the world, he would blow out his brains, and there would be an end. Horrible, ejaculated the priest. And it is thus heaven recompenses virtue, sir, added Cadrouse. You see, I, who never did a bad action but that I have told you of, am in destitution, with my poor wife dying of fever before my very eyes, and I unable to do anything in the world for her. I shall die of hunger, as old Dantes did, while Fernand and Danglars are rolling in wealth. How is that? Because their deeds have brought them good fortune, while honest men have been reduced to misery. What has become of Danglars, the instigator, and therefore the most guilty? What has become of him? Why, he left Marseilles, and was taken, on the recommendation of M. Morel, who did not know his crime, as cashier, into a Spanish bank. During the war with Spain he was employed in the commissariat of the French army, and made a fortune. Then with that money he speculated in the funds, and trebled or quadrupled his capital. And having first married his banker's daughter, who left him a widower, he has married a second time, a widow, a Madame de Narcon, daughter of M. de Servia, the king's chamberlain, who is in high favor at court. He is a millionaire, and they have made him a baron, and now he is the Baron Danglars, with a fine residence in the Rue de Mont Blanc, with 10 horses in his stables, 6 footmen in his ante-chamber, and I know not how many millions in his strong-box. Ah, said the abbe, in a peculiar tone, he is happy. Happy? Who can answer for that? Happiness or unhappiness is the secret, known but to oneself and the walls. Walls have ears but no tongue. But if a large fortune produces happiness, Danglars is happy. And Fernand? Why, much the same story. But how could a poor Catalan fisher boy, without education or resources, make a fortune? I confess this staggers me, and it has staggered everybody. There must have been in his life some strange secret that no one knows. But, then, by what visible steps has he attained this high fortune or high position? Both, sir, he has both fortune and position, both. This must be impossible. It would seem so, but listen, and you will understand. Some days before the return of the Emperor, Fernand was drafted. The Bourbons left him quietly enough at the Catalans, but Napoleon returned. A special levy was made, and Fernand was compelled to join. I went too, but as I was older than Fernand and had just married my poor wife, I was only sent to the coast. Fernand was enrolled in the active troop, went to the frontier with his regiment, and was at the Battle of Ligny. The night after that battle he was sentry at the door of a general who carried on a secret correspondence with the enemy. That same night the general was to go over to the English. He proposed to Fernand to accompany him. Fernand agreed to do so, deserted his post, and followed the general. Fernand would have been court-martialed if Napoleon had remained on the throne, but his action was rewarded by the Bourbons. He returned to France with the epaulet of sub-lieutenant, and as the protection of the general, who is in the highest favor, was accorded to him. He was a captain in 1823, during the Spanish War, that is to say, at the time when Danglars made his early speculations. Fernand was a Spaniard, and being sent to Spain to ascertain the feeling of his fellow countrymen, found Danglars there, got on very intimate terms with him, won over the support of the Royalists at the capital and in the provinces, received promises and made pledges on his own part, guided his regiment by paths known to himself alone through the mountain gorges which were held by the Royalists, and, in fact, rendered such services in this brief campaign that, after the taking of Trocadero, he was made colonel, and received the title of count and the cross of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Destiny, murmured the abbe. Yes, but listen, this was not all. The war with Spain being ended, Fernand's career was checked by the long peace which seemed likely to endure throughout Europe. Greece only had risen against Turkey, and had begun her war of independence. All eyes were turned towards Athens. It was the fashion to pity and support the Greeks. The French government, without protecting them openly, as you know, gave countenance to volunteer assistance. Fernand sought and obtained leave to go and serve in Greece, still having his name kept on the army roll. Some time after, it was stated that the Comte de Morcerf, this was the name he bore, had entered the service of Ali Pasha with the rank of Instructor General. Ali Pasha was killed, as you know, but before he died he recompensed the services of Fernand by leaving him a considerable sum, with which he returned to France when he was gazetted Lieutenant General. So that now, inquired the abbé, so that now, continued Cedros, he owns a magnificent house, no. 27, Rue du Helder, Paris. The abbé opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, then, making an effort at self-control, he said, "And Mercedes, they tell me that she has disappeared." "Disappeared," said Cedros. "Yes, as the sun disappears to rise the next day with still more splendor." "Has she made a fortune also?" inquired the abbé, with an ironical smile. "Mercedes is at this moment one of the greatest ladies in Paris," replied Cedros. "Go on," said the abbé. "It seems as if I were listening to the story of a dream, but I have seen things so extraordinary that what you tell me seems less astonishing than it otherwise may." Mercedes was at first in the deepest despair at the blow which deprived her of Edmond. I have told you of her attempts to propitiate M. de Villefort, her devotion to the elder Dantes. In the amid of her despair, a new affliction overtook her. This was the departure of Fernand, whose crime she did not know, and whom she regarded as her brother. Fernand went, and Mercedes remained alone. 3 months passed, and still she wept. No news of Edmond, no news of Fernand, no companionship save that of an old man who was dying with despair. One evening, after a day of accustomed vigil at the angle of 2 roads leading to Marseille from the Catalans, she returned to her home, more depressed than ever. Suddenly she heard a step she knew, turned anxiously around, the door opened, and Fernand, dressed in the uniform of a sub-lieutenant, stood before her. It was not the one she wished for most, but it seemed as if a part of her past life had returned to her. Mercedes seized Fernand's hands with a transport which he took for love, but which was only joy at being no longer alone in the world and seeing at last a friend after long hours of solitary sorrow. And then, it must be confessed, Fernand had never been hated, he was only not precisely loved. Another possessed all Mercedes' heart. That other was absent, had disappeared, perhaps was dead. At this last thought Mercedes burst into a flood of tears and wrung her hands in agony. But the thought, which she had always repelled before when it was suggested to her by another, came now in full force upon her mind, and then, too, old Dantes incessantly said to her, "Our Edmond is dead. If he were not, he would return to us." The old man died, as I have told you. Had he lived, Mercedes, perhaps, had not become the wife of another, for he would have been there to reproach her infidelity. Fernand saw this, and when he learned of the old man's death he returned. He was now a lieutenant. At his first coming he had not said a word of love to Mercedes. At the second he reminded her that he loved her. Mercedes begged for 6 months more in which to await and mourn for Edmond, so that, said the abbé, with a bitter smile, that makes 18 months in all. What more could the most devoted lover desire? Then he murmured the words of the English poet, "Frailty, your name is woman." 6 months afterwards, continued Cedros, the marriage took place in the church of Écoules, the very church in which she was to have married Edmond. Murmured the priest, "There was only a change of bridegrooms." Well, Mercedes was married, proceeded Kadros, but although in the eyes of the world she appeared calm, she nearly fainted as she passed La Reserve, where, 18 months before, the betrothal had been celebrated with him whom she may have known she still loved had she looked to the bottom of her heart. Fernand, more happy, but not more at his ease, for I saw at this time he was in constant dread of Edmund's return. Fernand was very anxious to get his wife away, and to depart himself. There were too many unpleasant possibilities associated with the Catalans, and 8 days after the wedding they left Marseille. "Did you ever see Mercedes again?" inquired the priest. "Yes, during the Spanish War, at Perpignan, where Fernand had left her. She was attending to the education of her son." The abbe started. "Ha, son," said he. "Yes," replied Kadros, little Albert. "But, then, to be able to instruct her child," continued the abbe, "she must have received an education herself. I understood from Edmund that she was the daughter of a simple fisherman, beautiful but uneducated." "Oh," replied Kadros, "did he know so little of his lovely betrothed? Mercedes may have been a queen, sir, if the crown were to be placed on the heads of the loveliest and most intelligent. Fernand's fortune was already waxing great, and she developed with his growing fortune. She learned drawing, music, everything. Besides, I believe, between ourselves, she did this in order to distract her mind, that she may forget, and she only filled her head in order to alleviate the weight on her heart. But now her position in life is assured," continued Kadros. "No doubt fortune and honors have comforted her. She is rich, a countess, and yet—" Kadros paused. "And yet what?" asked the abbe. "Yet, I am sure, she is not happy," said Kadros. "What makes you believe this?" "Why, when I found myself utterly destitute, I thought my old friends would, perhaps, assist me, so I went to Danglars, who would not evening receive me. I called on Fernand, who sent me 100 francs by his valet de chambre." "Then you did not see either of them?" "No, but Madame de Morcerf saw me." "How was that?" "As I went away a purse fell at my feet. It contained 25 louis. I raised my head quickly, and saw Mercedes, who at once shut the blind." "And M. de Villefort?" asked the abbe. "Oh, he never was a friend of mine. I did not know him, and I had nothing to ask of him." "Do you not know what became of him, and the share he had in Edmund's misfortunes?" "No, I only know that some time after Edmund's arrest, he married Mademoiselle de Saint Méran, and soon after left Marseille. No doubt he has been as lucky as the rest. No doubt he is as rich as Danglars, as high in station as Fernand. I only, as you see, have remained poor, wretched, and forgotten." "You are mistaken, my friend," replied the abbe. "God may seem sometimes to forget for a time while his justice reposes, but there always comes a moment when he remembers, and behold, a proof." As he spoke, the abbe took the diamond from his pocket, and giving it to Kadros, said, "Here, my friend, take this diamond, it is yours." "What, for me only?" cried Kadros. "Ah, sir, do not jest with me. This diamond was to have been shared among his friends. Edmund had one friend only, and thus it cannot be divided. Take the diamond, then, and sell it. It is worth 50,000 francs, and I repeat my wish that this sum may suffice to release you from your wretchedness." "Oh, sir," said Kadros, putting out one hand timidly, and with the other wiping away the perspiration which bedewed his brow, "oh, sir, do not make a jest of the happiness or despair of a man. I know what happiness and what despair are, and I never make a jest of such feelings. Take it, then, but in exchange." Kadros, who touched the diamond, withdrew his hand. The abbe smiled. "In exchange," he continued, "give me the red silk purse that M. Morel left on old Dante's chimney-piece, and which you tell me is still in your hands." Kadros, more and more astonished. went toward a large oaken cupboard, opened it, and gave the abb a long purse of faded red silk, round which were 2 copper runners that had once been gilt. The abb took it, and in return gave Cadros the diamond. "Oh, you are a man of God, sir," cried Cadros, for no one knew that Edmund had given you this diamond, and you may have kept it, which, said the abb to himself, you would have done. The abb rose, took his hat and gloves. "Well," he said, "all you have told me is perfectly true, then, and I may believe it in every particular." "See, sir," replied Cadros, "in this corner is a crucifix in holy wood. Here on this shelf is my wife's testament. Open this book, and I will swear upon it with my hand on the crucifix. I will swear to you by my soul's salvation, my faith as a Christian. I have told everything to you as it occurred, and as the recording angel will tell it to the ear of God at the day of the last judgment." "It is well," said the abb, convinced by his manner and tone that Cadros spoke the truth. "It is well, and may this money profit you. Adieu. I go far from men who thus so bitterly injure each other." The abb with difficulty got away from the enthusiastic thanks of Cadros, opened the door himself, got out and mounted his horse, once more saluted the innkeeper, who kept uttering his loud farewells, and then returned by the road he had travelled in coming. When Cadros turned around, he saw behind him La Carconte, paler and trembling more than ever. "Is, then, all that I have heard really true?" she inquired. "What? That he has given the diamond to us only?" inquired Cadros, half bewildered with joy. "Yes, nothing more true. See, here it is." The woman gazed at it a moment and then said in a gloomy voice, "Suppose it's false." Cadros started and turned pale. "False," he muttered. "False. Why should that man give me a false diamond? To get your secret without paying for it, you blockhead." Cadros remained for a moment aghast under the weight of such an idea. "Oh," he said, taking up his hat, which he placed on the red handkerchief tied round his head, "we will soon find out." "In what way?" "Why, the fair is on at Beaucaire. There are always jewelers from Paris there, and I will show it to them. Look after the house, wife, and I shall be back in 2 hours." And Cadros left the house in haste, and ran rapidly in the direction opposite to that which the priest had taken. Chapter 28. The Prison Register. The day after that in which the scene we have just described had taken place on the road between Bellegarde and Beaucaire, a man of about 30 or 32, dressed in a bright blue frock coat, nankeen trousers, and a white waistcoat having the appearance and accent of an Englishman, presented himself before the mayor of Marseille. "Sir," said he, "I am chief clerk of the house of Thomson and French of Rome. We are and have been these 10 years connected with the house of Morel and son of Marseille. We have 100,000 francs or thereabouts loaned on their securities, and we are a little uneasy at reports that have reached us that the firm is on the brink of ruin. I have come, therefore, express from Rome, to ask you for information." "Sir," replied the mayor, "I know very well that during the last 4 or 5 years misfortune has seemed to pursue M. Morel. He has lost 4 or 5 vessels and suffered by 3 or 4 bankruptcies, but it is not for me, although I am a creditor myself to the amount of 10,000 francs, to give any information as to the state of his finances. Ask of me, as mayor, what is my opinion of M. Morel, and I shall say that he is a man honorable to the last degree, and who has, up to this time, fulfilled every engagement with scrupulous punctuality. This is all I can say, sir. If you wish to learn more, address yourself to M. de Beauville, the inspector of prisons, No. 15, Rue de Noirs. He has, I believe, 200,000 francs in Morel's hands, and if there be any grounds for apprehension, as this is a greater amount than mine, you will most probably find him better informed than myself." The Englishman seemed to appreciate this extreme delicacy, made his bow, and went away. proceeding with a characteristic British stride towards the street mentioned. M. de Beauville was in his private room, and the Englishman, on perceiving him, made a gesture of surprise, which seemed to indicate that it was not the first time he had been in his presence. As to M. de Beauville, he was in such a state of despair that it was evident all the faculties of his mind, absorbed in the thought which occupied him at the moment, did not allow either his memory or his imagination to stray to the past. The Englishman, with the coolness of his nation, addressed him in terms nearly similar to those with which he had accosted the mayor of Marseilles. "Oh, sir," exclaimed M. de Beauville, "your fears are unfortunately but too well founded, and you see before you a man in despair. I had 200,000 francs placed in the hands of Morel and Son. These 200,000 francs were the dowry of my daughter, who was to be married in a fortnight, and these 200,000 francs were payable half on the 15th of this month, and the other half on the 15th of next month. I had informed M. Morel of my desire to have these payments punctually, and he has been here within the last half hour to tell me that if his ship, the Pharaon, did not come into port on the 15th, he would be wholly unable to make this payment. But," said the Englishman, "this looks very much like a suspension of payment." "It looks more like bankruptcy," exclaimed M. de Beauville despairingly. The Englishman appeared to reflect a moment, and then said, "From which it would appear, sir, that this credit inspires you with considerable apprehension. To tell you the truth, I consider it lost." "Well, then, I will buy it of you." "You?" "Yes, I. But at a tremendous discount, of course." "No, for 200,000 francs. Our house," added the Englishman, with a laugh, "does not do things in that way. And you will pay ready money." And the Englishman drew from his pocket a bundle of bank notes, which may have been twice the sum M. de Beauville feared to lose. A ray of joy passed across M. de Beauville's countenance, yet he made an effort at self-control, and said, "Sir, I ought to tell you that, in all probability, you will not realize 6% of this sum." "That's no affair of mine," replied the Englishman. "That is the affair of the house of Tonson and French, in whose name I act. They have, perhaps, some motive to serve in hastening the ruin of a rival firm. But all I know, sir, is that I am ready to hand you over the sum in exchange for your assignment of the debt. I only ask a brokerage." "Of course, that is perfectly just," cried M. de Beauville. "The commission is usually 1.5. Will you have 2, 3, 5%, or evening more?" "Whatever you say, sir," replied the Englishman, laughing. "I am like my house, and do not do such things. No, the commission I ask is quite different." "Name it, sir, I beg." "You are the inspector of prisons?" "I have been so these 14 years. You keep the registers of entries and departures?" "I do. To these registers there are added notes relative to the prisoners. There are special reports on every prisoner. Well, sir, I was educated at home by a poor devil of an abb who disappeared suddenly. I have since learned that he was confined in the Chateau d'If, and I should like to learn some particulars of his death." "What was his name?" "The Abbe Faria." "Oh, I recollect him perfectly," cried M. de Beauville. "He was crazy, so they said." "Oh, he was, decidedly." "Very possibly. But what sort of madness was it?" "He pretended to know of an immense treasure, and offered vast sums to the government if they would liberate him." "Poor devil! And he is dead?" "Yes, sir, 5 or 6 months ago, last February." "You have a good memory, sir, to recollect dates so well." "I recollect this because the poor devil's death was accompanied by a singular incident." "May I ask what that was?" said the Englishman with an expression of curiosity which a close observer would have been astonished at discovering in his phlegmatic countenance. "Oh dear, yes, sir. The abb's dungeon was 40 or 50 feet distant from that of one of Bonaparte's emissaries. one of those who had contributed the most to the return of the usurper in 1815, a very resolute and very dangerous man. Truly, said the Englishman. Yes, replied M. de Beauville, I myself had occasion to see this man in 1816 or 1817, and we could only go into his dungeon with a file of soldiers. That man made a deep impression on me. I shall never forget his countenance. The Englishman smiled imperceptibly. And you say, sir, he interposed, that the two dungeons were separated by a distance of 50 feet. But it appears that this this dangerous man's name was Edmond Dantes. It appears, sir, that this Edmond Dantes had procured tools or made them, for they found a tunnel through which the prisoners held communication with one another. This tunnel was dug, no doubt, with an intention of escape, no doubt. But unfortunately for the prisoners, the Abbe Faria had an attack of catalepsy and died. That must have cut short the projects of escape. For the dead man, yes, replied M. de Beauville, but not for the survivor. On the contrary, this Dante saw a means of accelerating his escape. He, no doubt, thought that prisoners who died in the shadow were interred in an ordinary burial ground, and he conveyed the dead man into his own cell, took his place in the sack in which they had sewed up the corpse, and awaited the moment of interment. It was a bold step, and one that showed some courage, remarked the Englishman. As I have already told you, sir, he was a very dangerous man, and fortunately, by his own act disembarrassed the government of the fears it had on his account. How was that? How? Do you not comprehend? No, the Chateau d'If has no cemetery, and they simply throw the dead into the sea, after fastening a 36-pound cannonball to their feet. Well, observed the Englishman as if he were slow of comprehension. Well, they fastened a 36-pound ball to his feet and threw him into the sea. Really? Exclaimed the Englishman. Yes, sir, continued the inspector of prisons. You may imagine the amazement of the fugitive when he found himself flung headlong over the rocks. I should like to have seen his face at that moment. That would have been difficult. No matter, replied de Beauville, in supreme good humor at the certainty of recovering his 200,000 francs. No matter, I can fancy it. And he shouted with laughter. So can I, said the Englishman, and he laughed too, but he laughed as the English do at the end of his tests. And so, continued the Englishman who first gained his composure, he was drowned, unquestionably, so that the governor got rid of the dangerous and the crazy prisoner at the same time? Precisely. But some official document was drawn up as to this affair, I suppose? Inquired the Englishman. Yes, the mortuary deposition. You understand, Dante's relations, if he had any, may have some interest in knowing if he were dead or alive, so that now, if there were anything to inherit from him, they may do so with easy conscience. He is dead, and no mistake about it. Oh, yes, and they may have the fact attested whenever they please. So be it, said the Englishman. But to return to these registers. True, this story has diverted our attention from them. Excuse me. Excuse you for what? For the story? By no means. It really seems to me very curious. Yes, truly. So, sir, you wish to see all relating to the poor Abbe, who really was gentleness itself. Yes, you will much oblige me. Go into my study here, and I will show it to you. And they both entered M. de Beauville's study. Everything was here arranged in perfect order. Each register had its number, each file of papers its place. The inspector begged the Englishman to seat himself in an armchair, and placed before him the register and documents relative to the Chateau d'If, giving him all the time he desired for the examination, while de Beauville seated himself in a corner and began to read his newspaper. The Englishman easily found the entries relative to the Abbe Faria, but it seemed that the history which the inspector had related interested him greatly, for after having perused the first documents he turned over the leaves until he reached the deposition respecting Edmond Dantes. There, he found everything arranged in due order: the accusation, examination, morals, petition, M. de Villefort's marginal notes. He folded up the accusation quietly and put it as quietly in his pocket, read the examination, and saw that the name of Noirtier was not mentioned in it. Perused, too, the application dated 10th April, 1815, in which Morel, by the deputy procuror's advice, exaggerated with the best intentions. For Napoleon was then on the throne the services Dantes had rendered to the imperial cause, services which Villefort's certificates rendered indispensable. Then he saw through the whole thing. This petition to Napoleon, kept back by Villefort, had become, under the Second Restoration, a terrible weapon against him in the hands of the king's attorney. He was no longer astonished when he searched on to find in the register this note, placed in a bracket against his name: Edmond Dantes, an inveterate Bonapartist, took an active part in the return from the island of Elba, to be kept in strict solitary confinement, and to be closely watched and guarded. Beneath these lines was written in another hand, see note above, nothing can be done. He compared the writing in the bracket with the writing of the certificate placed beneath Morel's petition, and discovered that the note in the bracket was the same writing as the certificate, that is to say, was in Villefort's handwriting. As to the note which accompanied this, the Englishman understood that it may have been added by some inspector who had taken a momentary interest in Dante's situation, but who had, from the remarks we have quoted, found it impossible to give any effect to the interest he had felt. As we have said, the inspector, from discretion, and that he may not disturb the Abbé Faria's pupil in his researches, had seated himself in a corner and was reading Le Drapeau Blanc. He did not see the Englishman fold up and place in his pocket the accusation written by Danglars under the arbor of La Réserve, and which had the postmark Marseille, 27th Feb. Delivery 6 o'clock p.m. But it must be said that if he had seen it, he attached so little importance to this scrap of paper, and so much importance to his 200,000 francs, that he would not have opposed whatever the Englishman may do, however irregular it may be. Thanks, said the latter, closing the register with a slam. I have all I want. Now it is for me to perform my promise. Give me a simple assignment of your debt, acknowledge in that the receipt of the cash, and I will hand you over the money. He rose, gave his seat to M. Chapter 29. The House of Morel and Son. Any one who had quitted Marseille a few years previously, well acquainted with the interior of Morel's warehouse, and had returned at this date, would have found a great change. Instead of that air of life, of comfort, and of happiness that permeates a flourishing and prosperous business establishment, instead of merry faces at the windows, busy clerks hurrying to and fro in the long corridors, instead of the court, filled with bales of goods, re-echoing with the cries and the jokes of porters, one would have immediately perceived all aspect of sadness and gloom out of all the numerous clerks that used to fill the deserted corridor and the empty office. But two remained. One was a young man of 24 who was in love with M. Morel's daughter, and had remained with him in spite of the efforts of his friends to induce him to withdraw. The other was an old one-eyed cashier, called Cockles, or Cockeye, a nickname given him by the young men who used to throng this vast, now almost deserted beehive, and which had so completely replaced his real name that he would not, in all probability, have replied to any one who addressed him by it. Cockles remained in M. Morel's service, and a most singular change had taken place in his position. He had at the same time risen to the rank of cashier and sunk to the rank of a servant. He was, however, the same Cockles, good, patient, devoted, but inflexible on the subject of arithmetic, the only point on which he would have stood firm against the world, evening against M. Morel, and strong in the multiplication table, which he had at his fingers' ends. No matter what scheme or what trap was laid to catch him, In the amid of the disasters that befell the house, Cockles was the only one unmoved. But this did not arise from a want of affection, on the contrary, from a firm conviction. Like the rats that one by one forsake the doomed ship evening before the vessel weighs anchor, so all the numerous clerks had by degrees deserted the office and the warehouse. Cockles had seen them go without thinking of inquiring the cause of their departure. Everything was, as we have said, a question of arithmetic to Cockles, and during 20 years he had always seen all payments made with such exactitude that it seemed as impossible to him that the house should stop payment as it would to a miller that the river that had so long turned his mill should cease to flow. Nothing had as yet occurred to shake Cockles' belief. The last month's payment had been made with the most scrupulous exactitude. Cockles had detected an overbalance of 14 sous in his cash, and the same evening he had brought them to M. Morel, who, with a melancholy smile, threw them into an almost empty drawer, saying, "Thanks, Cockles, you are the pearl of cashiers." Cockles went away perfectly happy for this eulogium of M. Morel, himself the pearl of the honest men of Marseille, flattered him more than a present of 50 crowns. But since the end of the month M. Morel had passed many an anxious hour. In order to meet the payments then due, he had collected all his resources, and, fearing lest the report of his distress should get bruited abroad at Marseille when he was known to be reduced to such an extremity, he went to the Beaucaire fair to sell his wife's and daughter's jewels and a portion of his plate. By this means, the end of the month was past, but his resources were now exhausted. Credit, owing to the reports afloat, was no longer to be had, and to meet the 100,000 francs due on the 10th of the present month, and the 100,000 francs due on the 15th of the next month to M. de Beauville. M. Morel had, in reality, no hope but the return of the Pharaon, of whose departure he had learnt from a vessel which had weighed anchor at the same time, and which had already arrived in harbor. But this vessel which, like the Pharaon, came from Calcutta had been in for a fortnight, while no intelligence had been received of the Pharaon. Such was the state of affairs when, the day after his interview with M. de Beauville, the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French, of Rome, presented himself at M. Morel's. Emmanuel received him. This young man was alarmed by the appearance of every new face, for every new face may be that of a new creditor, come in anxiety to question the head of the house. The young man, wishing to spare his employer the pain of this interview, questioned the newcomer, but the stranger declared that he had nothing to say to M. Emmanuel, and that his business was with M. Morel in person. Emmanuel sighed and summoned Cockles. Cockles appeared, and the young man bade him conduct the stranger to M. Morel's apartment. Cockles went first, and the stranger followed him. On the staircase they met a beautiful girl of 16 or 17, who looked with anxiety at the stranger. M. Morel is in his room, is he not, Mademoiselle Julie? Said the cashier. Yes, I think so, at least, said the young girl hesitatingly. Go and see Cockles, and if my father is there, announce this gentleman. It will be useless to announce me, mademoiselle, returned the Englishman. M. Morel does not know my name. This worthy gentleman has only to announce the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French, of Rome, with whom your father does business. The young girl turned pale and continued to descend, while the stranger and Cockles continued to mount the staircase. She entered the office, where Emmanuel was, while Cockles, by the aid of a key he possessed, opened a door in the corner of a landing place on the second staircase, conducted the stranger into an antechamber, opened a second door, which he closed behind him, and after having left the clerk of the house of Thomson and French alone, returned and signed to him that he could enter. The Englishman entered and found Morel seated at a table, turning over the formidable columns of his ledger, which contained the list of his liabilities. At the sight of the stranger, M. Morel closed the ledger, arose, and offered a seat to the stranger, and when he had seen him seated, resumed his own chair. 14 years had changed the worthy merchant, who, in his 36th year at the opening of this history, was now in his 50s. His hair had turned white, time and sorrow had plowed deep furrows on his brow, and his look, once so firm and penetrating, was now irresolute and wandering, as if he feared being forced to fix his attention on some particular thought or person. The Englishman looked at him with an air of curiosity, evidently mingled with interest. "Monsieur," said Morel, whose uneasiness was increased by this examination, "you wish to speak to me?" "Yes, monsieur." "You are aware from whom I come?" "The house of Tonson and French, at least, so my cashier tells me." "He has told you rightly." The house of Tonson and French had 300 or 400 francs to pay this month in France, and, knowing your strict punctuality, have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and charged me as they became due to present them and to employ the money. Otherwise, Morel sighed deeply and passed his hand over his forehead, which was covered with perspiration. "So then, sir," said Morel, "you hold bills of mine?" "Yes, and for a considerable sum." "What is the amount?" asked Morel with a voice he strove to render firm. "Here is," said the Englishman, taking a quantity of papers from his pocket, "an assignment of 200 francs to our house by M. de Beauville, the inspector of prisons, to whom they are due. You acknowledge, of course, that you owe this sum to him?" "Yes, he placed the money in my hands at 4.5% nearly 5 years ago." "When are you to pay?" "Half the 15th of this month, half the 15th of next." "Just so, and now here are 32,500 francs payable shortly. They are all signed by you and assigned to our house by the holders." "I recognize them," said Morel, whose face was suffused as he thought that, for the first time in his life, he would be unable to honor his own signature. "Is this all?" "No, I have for the end of the month these bills which have been assigned to us by the house of Pascal and the house of Wild and Turner of Marseille, amounting to nearly 55 francs, in all, 287,500 francs. It is impossible to describe what Morel suffered during this enumeration. 287,500 francs, repeated he. "Yes, sir," replied the Englishman. "I will not," continued he, after a moment's silence, "conceal from you that while your probity and exactitude up to this moment are universally acknowledged, yet the report is current in Marseille that you are not able to meet your liabilities." At this almost brutal speech Morel turned deathly pale. "Sir," said he, "up to this time, and it is now more than 24 years since I received the direction of this house from my father, who had himself conducted it for 35 years, never has anything bearing the signature of Morel and Son been dishonored." "I know that," replied the Englishman, "but as a man of honor should answer another, tell me fairly, shall you pay these with the same punctuality?" Morel shuddered and looked at the man, who spoke with more assurance than he had hitherto shown. "To questions frankly put," said he, "a straightforward answer should be given. Yes, I shall pay, if, as I hope, my vessel arrives safely, for its arrival will again procure me the credit which the numerous accidents of which I have been the victim have deprived me. But if the Pharaon should be lost, and this last resource be gone," the poor man's eyes filled with tears. "Well," said the other, "if this last resource fail you?" "Well," returned Morel, "it is a cruel thing to be forced to say, but, already used to misfortune, I must habituate myself to shame. I fear I shall be forced to suspend payment." "Have you no friends who could assist you?" Morel smiled mournfully. "In business, sir," said he, "one has no friends, only correspondents." "It is true," murmured the Englishman. "Then you have but one hope." "But one." "The last, the last, so that if this fail, I am ruined, completely ruined. As I was on my way here, a vessel was coming into port." "I know it," sir, a young man who still adheres to my fallen fortunes, passes a part of his time in a belvedere at the top of the house. In hopes of being the first to announce good news to me, he has informed me of the arrival of this ship. And it is not yours? No, she is aboard a vessel, lad giant. She comes from India also, but she is not mine. Perhaps she has spoken to the Pharaon, and brings you some tidings of her. Shall I tell you plainly one thing, sir? I dread almost as much to receive any tidings of my vessel as to remain in doubt. Uncertainty is still hope. Then in a low voice Morel added, this delay is not natural. The Pharaon left Calcutta the 5th February. She ought to have been here a month ago. What is that? Said the Englishman. What is the meaning of that noise? Oh, oh, cried Morel, turning pale. What is it? A loud noise was heard on the stairs of people moving hastily, and half-stifled sobs. Morel rose and advanced to the door, but his strength failed him and he sank into a chair. The two men remained opposite one another, Morel trembling in every limb, the stranger gazing at him with an air of profound pity. The noise had ceased, but it seemed that Morel expected something had occasioned the noise, and something must follow. The stranger fancied he heard footsteps on the stairs, and that the footsteps, which were those of several persons, stopped at the door. A key was inserted in the lock of the first door, and the creaking of hinges was audible. There are only two persons who have the key to that door, murmured Morel, Cockles, and Julie. At this instant the second door opened, and the young girl, her eyes bathed with tears, appeared. Morel rose, tremblingly, supporting himself by the arm of the chair. He would have spoken, but his voice failed him. Oh, father, said she, clasping her hands, forgive your child for being the bearer of evil tidings. Morel again changed color. Julie threw herself into his arms. Oh, father, father, murmured she, courage. The Pharaon has gone down. Then, said Morel in a hoarse voice. The young girl did not speak, but she made an affirmative sign with her head as she lay on her father's breast. And the crew? Asked Morel. Saved, said the girl, saved by the crew of the vessel that has just entered the harbor. Morel raised his two hands to heaven with an expression of resignation and sublime gratitude. Thanks, my God, said he, at least you strikest but me alone. A tear moistened the eye of the phlegmatic Englishman. Come in, said Morel, for I presume you are all at the door. Scarcely had he uttered those words than Madame Morel entered weeping bitterly. Emmanuel followed her, and in the antechamber were visible the rough faces of 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. At the sight of these men the Englishman started and advanced a step, then restrained himself, and retired into the farthest and most obscure corner of the apartment. Madame Morel sat down by her husband and took one of his hands in hers. Julie still lay with her head on his shoulder. Emmanuel stood in the center of the chamber and seemed to form the link between Morel's family and the sailors at the door. How did this happen? Said Morel. Draw near, Penelon, said the young man, and tell us all about it. An old seaman, bronzed by the tropical sun, advanced, twirling the remains of a tarpaulin between his hands. Good day, M. Morel, said he, as if he had just quitted Marseille the previous evening, and had just returned from Aix or Toulon. Good day, Penelon, returned Morel, who could not refrain from smiling through his tears. Where is the captain? The captain, M. Morel, he has stayed behind sick at Palma. But please, God, it won't be much, and you will see him in a few days all alive and hearty. Well, now tell your story, Penelon. Penelon rolled his quid in his cheek, placed his hand before his mouth, turned his head and sent a long jet of tobacco juice into the antechamber, advanced his foot, balanced himself, and began, you see, M. Morel, said he, we were somewhere between Cape Blanc and Cape Boyador, sailing with a fair breeze, south-southwest after a week's calm, when Captain Gaumard comes up to me, I was at the helm I should tell you, and says Penelon, what do you think of those clouds coming up over there? I was just then looking at them myself. What do I think, Captain? Why, I think that they are rising faster than they have any business to do, and that they would not be so black if they didn't mean mischief. That's my opinion too, said the captain, and I'll take precautions accordingly. We are carrying too much canvas. Avast, there, all hands. Take in the studding nacelles and stow the flying jib. It was time. The squall was on us, and the vessel began to heel. Ah, said the captain, we have still too much canvas set. All hands lower. The mainsail. 5 minutes after, it was down, and we sailed under mizzen topsails and topgallant sails. Well, Penelon, said the captain, what makes you shake your head? Why, I says, I still think you've got too much on. I think you're right, answered he. We shall have a gale, more than that, we shall have a tempest, or I don't know what's what. You could see the wind coming like the dust at Montredon. Luckily, the captain understood his business. Take in 2 reefs in the topsails, cried the captain. Let go the bowlines, haul the brace, lower the topgallant sails, haul out the reef tackles on the yards. That was not enough for those latitudes, said the Englishman. I should have taken 4 reefs in the topsails and furled the spanker. His firm, sonorous, and unexpected voice made every one start. Penelon put his hand over his eyes and then stared at the man who thus criticized the maneuvers of his captain. We did better than that, sir, said the old sailor respectfully. We put the helm up to run before the tempest. 10 minutes after we struck our topsails and scudded under bare poles. The vessel was very old to risk that, said the Englishman. It was that did the business. After pitching heavily for 12 hours we sprung a leak. Penelon, said the captain, I think we are sinking. Give me the helm, and go down into the hold. I gave him the helm, and descended. There was already 3 feet of water. All hands to the pumps, I shouted, but it was too late, and it seemed the more we pumped the more came in. Ah, said I, after 4 hours' work, since we are sinking, let us sink. We can die but once. That's the example you set, Penelon, cries the captain. Very well, wait a minute. He went into his cabin and came back with a brace of pistols. I will blow the brains out of the first man who leaves the pump, said he. Well done, said the Englishman. There's nothing gives you so much courage as good reasons, continued the sailor, and during that time the wind had abated and the sea gone down, but the water kept rising, not much, only 2 inches an hour, but still it rose. 2 inches an hour does not seem much, but in 12 hours that makes 2 feet, and 3 we had before, that makes 5. Come, said the captain, we have done all in our power, and Morale will have nothing to reproach us with. We have tried to save the ship, let us now save ourselves. To the boats, my lads, as quick as you can. Now, continued Penelon, you see, Moral, a sailor is attached to his ship, but still more to his life, so we did not wait to be told twice, the more so that the ship was sinking under us and seemed to say, get along, save yourselves. We soon launched the boat, and all 8 of us got into it. The captain descended last, or rather, he did not descend, he would not quit the vessel, so I took him round the waist and threw him into the boat, and then I jumped after him. It was time, for just as I jumped the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man of war. 10 minutes after she pitched forward, then the other way, spun round, and then goodbye to the Pharaon. As for us, we were 3 days without anything to eat or drink, so that we began to think of drawing lots who should feed the rest. When we saw La Gironde, we made signals of distress. She perceived us, made for us, and took us all on board. There now, Moral, that's the whole truth, on the honor of a sailor. Is not it true, you fellows there? A general murmur of approbation showed that the narrator had faithfully detailed their misfortunes and sufferings. Well, well, said M. Moral, I know there was no one in fault, but destiny. It was the will of God that this should happen. Blessed be his name. What wages are due to you? Oh, don't let us talk of that, M. Moral, yes, but we will talk of it. Well, then, 3 months, said Penelon. Cockles, pay 200 francs to each of these good fellows, said Moral. At another time, added he, I should have said, give them, besides, 200 francs over as a present, but times are changed, and the little money that remains to me is not my own. Penelon turned to his companions and exchanged a few words with them. As for that, M. Moral, said he, again turning his quid, as for that, as for what? The money. Well, well, we all say that 50 francs will be enough for us at present, and that we will wait for the rest. Thanks, my friends, thanks, cried Morel gratefully. Take it, and if you can find another employer, enter his service. You are free to do so. These last words produced a prodigious effect on the seaman. Penelon nearly swallowed his quid. Fortunately he recovered. What, M. Moral, said he in a low voice, you send us away. You are then angry with us. No, no, said M. Moral, I am not angry. Quite the contrary, and I do not send you away. But I have no more ships, and therefore I do not want any sailors. No more ships, returned Penelon. Well, then, you'll build some. We'll wait for you. I have no money to build ships with, Penelon, said the poor owner, mournfully, so I cannot accept your kind offer. No more money? Then you must not pay us. We can scud, like the Pharaon, under bare poles. Enough, enough, cried Morel, almost overpowered. Leave me, I pray. We shall meet again in a happier time. Emmanuel, go with them, and see that my orders are executed. At least, we shall see each other again, M. Morel, asked Penelon. Yes, I hope so, at least. Now go. He made a sign to Cockles, who went first. The seamen followed him, and Emmanuel brought up the rear. Now, said the owner to his wife and daughter, leave me. I wish to speak with this gentleman, and he glanced towards the clerk of Thomson and French, who had remained motionless in the corner during this scene, in which he had taken no part, except the few words we have mentioned. The two women looked at this person whose presence they had entirely forgotten, and retired. But as she left the apartment, Julie gave the stranger a supplicating glance, to which he replied by a smile that an indifferent spectator would have been surprised to see on his stern features. The two men were left alone. Well, sir, said Morel, sinking into a chair, you have heard all, and I have nothing further to tell you. I see, returned the Englishman, that a fresh and unmerited misfortune has overwhelmed you, and this only increases my desire to serve you. Oh, sir, cried Morel, let me see, continued the stranger, I am one of your largest creditors. Your bills, at least, are the first that will fall due. Do you wish for time to pay? A delay would save my honor, and consequently my life. How long a delay do you wish for? Morel reflected. 2 months, said he. I will give you 3, replied the stranger. But, asked Morel, will the house of Thomson and French consent? Oh, I take everything on myself. Today is the 5th of June. Yes. Well, renew these bills up to the 5th of September, and on the 5th of September at 11 o'clock the hand of the clock pointed to 11. I shall come to receive the money. I shall expect you, returned Morel, and I will pay you, or I shall be dead. These last words were uttered in so low a tone that the stranger could not hear them. The bills were renewed, the old ones destroyed, and the poor shipowner found himself with 3 months before him to collect his resources. The Englishman received his thanks with the phlegm peculiar to his nation, and Morel, overwhelming him with grateful blessings, conducted him to the staircase. The stranger met Julie on the stairs. She pretended to be descending, but in reality she was waiting for him. Oh, sir, said she, clasping her hands. Mademoiselle, said the stranger, one day you will receive a letter, signed Sinbad the sailor. Do exactly what the letter bids you, however strange it may appear. Yes, sir, returned Julie. Do you promise? I swear to you I will. It is well. Adieu, mademoiselle. Continue to be the good, sweet girl you are at present, and I have great hopes that heaven will reward you by giving you Emmanuel for a husband. Julie uttered a faint cry, blushed like a rose, and leaned against the baluster. The stranger waved his hand and continued to descend. In the court he found Penelon, who, with a rouleau of 100 francs in either hand, seemed unable to make up his mind to retain them. Chapter 30. The 5th of September. The extension provided for by the agent of Thomson and French, at the moment when Morel expected it least, was to the poor shipowner so decided a stroke of good fortune that he almost dared to believe that fate was at length grown weary of wasting her spite upon him. The same day he told his wife, Emmanuel, and his daughter all that had occurred, and a ray of hope, if not of tranquility, returned to the family. Unfortunately, however, Morel had not only engagements with the house of Thomson and French, who had shown themselves so considerate towards him, and, as he had said, in business he had correspondents, and not friends. When he thought the matter over, he could by no means account for this generous conduct on the part of Thomson and French towards him, and could only attribute it to some such selfish argument as this: we had better help a man who owes us nearly 300 francs, and have those 300 francs at the end of 3 months than hasten his ruin, and get only 6 or 8% of our money back again. Unfortunately, whether through envy or stupidity, all Morel's correspondents did not take this view, and some evening came to a contrary decision. The bills signed by Morel were presented at his office with scrupulous exactitude, and, thanks to the delay granted by the Englishman, were paid by Cockles with equal punctuality. Cockles thus remained in his accustomed tranquillity. It was Morel alone who remembered with alarm that if he had to repay on the 15th the 50 francs of M. de Beauville, and on the 30th the 32 500 francs of bills, for which, as well as the debt due to the inspector of prisons, he had time granted, he must be a ruined man. The opinion of all the commercial men was that, under the reverses which had successively weighed down Morel, it was impossible for him to remain solvent. Great, therefore, was the astonishment when, at the end of the month, he cancelled all his obligations with his usual punctuality. Still, confidence was not restored to all minds, and the general opinion was that the complete ruin of the unfortunate shipowner had been postponed only until the end of the month. The month passed, and Morel made extraordinary efforts to get in all his resources. Formerly his paper, at any date, was taken with confidence and was evening in request. Morel now tried to negotiate bills at 90 days only, and none of the banks would give him credit. Fortunately, Morel had some funds coming in on which he could rely, and as they reached him, he found himself in a condition to meet his engagements when the end of July came. The agent of Thomson and French had not been again seen at Marseille. The day after, or 2 days after his visit to Morel, he had disappeared, and as in that city he had had no intercourse but with the mayor, the inspector of prisons, and M. Morel, his departure left no trace except in the memories of these 3 persons. As to the sailors of the Pharaon, they must have found snug berths elsewhere, for they also had disappeared. Captain Gaumard, recovered from his illness, had returned from Palma. He delayed presenting himself at Morel's, but the owner, hearing of his arrival, went to see him. The worthy shipowner knew, from Penelon's recital of the captain's brave conduct during the storm, and tried to console him. He brought him also the amount of his wages, which Captain Gaumard had not dared to apply for. As he descended the staircase, Morrel met Penelon, who was going up. Penelon had, it would seem, made good use of his money, for he was newly clad. When he saw his employer, the worthy tar seemed much embarrassed, drew on one side into the corner of the landing place, passed his quid from one cheek to the other, stared stupidly with his great eyes, and only acknowledged the squeeze of the hand which Morrel, as usual, gave him by a slight pressure in return. Morrel attributed Penelon's embarrassment to the elegance of his attire. It was evident the good fellow had not gone to such an expense on his own account. He was, no doubt, engaged on board some other vessel, and thus his bashfulness arose from the fact of his not having, if we may so express ourselves, worn mourning for the Pharaon longer. Perhaps he had come to tell Captain Gaumard of his good luck, and to offer him employment from his new master. "Worthy fellows," said Morrel, as he went away, "may your new master love you as I loved you, and be more fortunate than I have been." August rolled by in unceasing efforts on the part of Morrel to renew his credit or revive the old. On the 20th of August it was known at Marseille that he had left town in the mail coach, and then it was said that the bills would go to protest at the end of the month, and that Morrel had gone away and left his chief clerk Emmanuel and his cashier Cockles to meet the creditors. But, contrary to all expectation, when the 31st of August came, the house opened as usual, and Cockles appeared behind the grating of the counter, examined all bills presented with the usual scrutiny, and from first to last paid all with the usual precision. There came in, moreover, 2 drafts which Morrel had fully anticipated, and which Cockles paid as punctually as the bills which the shipowner had accepted. All this was incomprehensible, and then, with the tenacity peculiar to prophets of bad news, the failure was put off until the end of September. On the 1st, Morrel returned. He was awaited by his family with extreme anxiety, for from this journey to Paris they hoped great things. Morrel had thought of Danglars, who was now immensely rich, and had lain under great obligations to Morrel in former days, since to him it was owing that Danglars entered the service of the Spanish banker, with whom he had laid the foundations of his vast wealth. It was said at this moment that Danglars was worth from 6 to 8 millions of francs, and had unlimited credit. Danglars, then, without taking a crown from his pocket, could save Morrel. He had but to pass his word for a loan, and Morrel was saved. Morrel had long thought of Danglars, but had kept away from some instinctive motive, and had delayed as long as possible availing himself of this last resource. And Morrel was right, for he returned home crushed by the humiliation of a refusal. Yet, on his arrival, Morrel did not utter a complaint or say one harsh word. He embraced his weeping wife and daughter, pressed Emmanuel's hand with friendly warmth, and then going to his private room on the 2nd floor had sent for Cockles. Then said the 2 women to Emmanuel, "We are truly ruined." It was agreed in a brief council held among them that Julie should write to her brother, who was in garrison at Nimes, to come to them as speedily as possible. The poor women felt instinctively that they required all their strength to support the blow that impended. Besides, Maximilian Morrel, though hardly 22, had great influence over his father. He was a strong-minded, upright young man. At the time when he decided on his profession, his father had no desire to choose for him, but had consulted young Maximilian's taste. He had at once declared for a military life, and had in consequence studied hard, passed brilliantly through the Polytechnic School, and left it as sub-lieutenant of the 53d of the line. For a year he had held this rank, and expected promotion on the first vacancy. In his regiment, Maximilian Morrel was noted for his rigid observance, not only of the obligations imposed on a soldier, but also of the duties of a man, and he thus gained the name of the Stoic. We need hardly say that many of those who gave him this epithet repeated it because they had heard it, and did not even know what it meant. This was the young man whom his mother and sister called to their aid to sustain them under the serious trial, which they felt they would soon have to endure. They had not mistaken the gravity of this event, for the moment after Morrel had entered his private office with Cockles, Julie saw the latter leave it pale, trembling, and his features betraying the utmost consternation. She would have questioned him as he passed by her, but the worthy creature hastened down the staircase with unusual precipitation, and only raised his hands to heaven and exclaimed, "Oh, mademoiselle, mademoiselle, what a dreadful misfortune! Who could ever have believed it?" A moment afterwards Julie saw him go upstairs carrying 2 or 3 heavy ledgers, a portfolio, and a bag of money. Morrel examined the ledgers, opened the portfolio, and counted the money. All his funds amounted to 60 or 80 francs, his bills receivable up to the 5th to 40 or 50, which, making the best of everything, gave him 14 francs to meet debts amounting to 287,500 francs. He had not even the means for making a possible settlement on account. However, when Morrel went down to his dinner, he appeared very calm. This calmness was more alarming to the 2 women than the deepest dejection would have been. After dinner Morrel usually went out and used to take his coffee at the Fichtean Club and read the Semaphore. This day he did not leave the house, but returned to his office. As to Cockles, he seemed completely bewildered. For part of the day he went into the courtyard, seated himself on a stone with his head bare and exposed to the blazing sun. Emmanuel tried to comfort the women, but his eloquence faltered. The young man was too well acquainted with the business of the house not to feel that a great catastrophe hung over the Morrel family. Night came. The 2 women had watched, hoping that, when he left his room, Morrel would come to them, but they heard him pass before their door, and trying to conceal the noise of his footsteps, they listened. He went into his sleeping room and fastened the door. Inside, Madame Morrel sent her daughter to bed, and half an hour after Julie had retired, she rose, took off her shoes, and went stealthily along the passage to see through the keyhole what her husband was doing. In the passage she saw a retreating shadow. It was Julie, who, uneasy herself, had anticipated her mother. The young lady went towards Madame Morrel. "He is writing," she said. They had understood each other without speaking. Madame Morrel looked again through the keyhole. Morrel was writing, but Madame Morrel remarked what her daughter had not observed, that her husband was writing on stamped paper. The terrible idea that he was writing his will flashed across her. She shuddered, and yet had not strength to utter a word. Next day Morrel seemed as calm as ever, went into his office as usual, came to his breakfast punctually, and then, after dinner, he placed his daughter beside him, took her head in his arms, and held her for a long time against his bosom. In the evening, Julie told her mother that although he was apparently so calm, she had noticed that her father's heart beat violently. The next 2 days passed in much the same way. On the evening of the 4th of September, Morrel asked his daughter for the key of his study. Julie trembled at this request, which seemed to her of bad omen. Why did her father ask for this key, which she always kept, and which was only taken from her in childhood as a punishment? The young girl looked at Morrel. "What have I done wrong, father," she said, "that you should take this key from me?" "Nothing, my dear," replied the unhappy man, the tears starting to his eyes at this simple question. "Nothing, only I want it." Julie made a pretense to feel for the key. "I must have left it in my room," she said, and she went out. But instead of going to her apartment she hastened to consult Emmanuel. "Do not give this key to your father," said he, "and tomorrow morning, if possible, do not quit him for a moment." She questioned Emmanuel, but he knew nothing, or would not say what he knew. During the night, Between the 4th and 5th of September, Madame Morel remained listening for every sound, and until 3 o'clock in the morning, she heard her husband pacing the room in great agitation. It was 3 o'clock when he threw himself on the bed. The mother and daughter passed the night together. They had expected Maximilian since the previous evening. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Morel entered their chamber. He was calm, but the agitation of the night was legible in his pale and careworn visage. They did not dare to ask him how he had slept. Morel was kinder to his wife, more affectionate to his daughter than he had ever been. He could not cease gazing at and kissing the sweet girl. Julie, mindful of Emmanuel's request, was following her father when he quitted the room, but he said to her quickly, "Remain with your mother, dearest." Julie wished to accompany him. "I wish you to do so," said he. This was the first time Morel had ever so spoken, but he said it in a tone of paternal kindness, and Julie did not dare to disobey. She remained at the same spot, standing mute and motionless. An instant afterwards the door opened. She felt 2 arms encircle her, and a mouth pressed her forehead. She looked up and uttered an exclamation of joy. "Maximilian, my dearest brother," she cried. At these words Madame Morel rose and threw herself into her son's arms. "Mother," said the young man, looking alternately at Madame Morel and her daughter, "what has occurred? What has happened? Your letter has frightened me, and I have come here with all speed." "Julie," said Madame Morel, making a sign to the young man, "go and tell your father that Maximilian has just arrived." The young lady rushed out of the apartment, but on the first step of the staircase she found a man holding a letter in his hand. "Are you not Mademoiselle Julie Morel?" inquired the man with a strong Italian accent. "Yes, sir," replied Julie with hesitation. "What is your pleasure?" "I do not know you." "Read this letter," he said, handing it to her. Julie hesitated. "It concerns the best interests of your father," said the messenger. The young girl hastily took the letter from him. She opened it quickly and read, "Go this moment to the Elise de Melun, enter the house No. 15, ask the porter for the key of the room on the 5th floor, enter the apartment, take from the corner of the mantelpiece a purse netted in red silk and give it to your father. It is important that he should receive it before 11 o'clock. You promised to obey me implicitly. Remember your oath." Sinbad the sailor. The young girl uttered a joyful cry, raised her eyes, looked round to question the messenger, but he had disappeared. She cast her eyes again over the note to peruse it a second time, and saw there was a postscript. She read, "It is important that you should fulfill this mission in person and alone. If you go accompanied by any other person, or should any one else go in your place, the porter will reply that he does not know anything about it." This postscript decreased greatly the young girl's happiness. Was there nothing to fear? Was there not some snare laid for her? Her innocence had kept her in ignorance of the dangers that may assail a young girl of her age, but there is no need to know danger in order to fear it. Truly, it may be observed that it is usually unknown perils that inspire the greatest terror. Julie hesitated and resolved to take counsel. Yet, through a singular impulse, it was neither to her mother nor her brother that she applied, but to Emmanuel. She hastened down and told him what had occurred on the day when the agent of Tonson and French had come to her father's, related the scene on the staircase, repeated the promise she had made, and showed him the letter. "You must go, then, mademoiselle," said Emmanuel. "Go there," murmured Julie. "Yes, I will accompany you." "But did you not read that I must be alone?" said Julie. "And you shall be alone," replied the young man. "I will await you at the corner of the Rue de Musée, and if you are so long absent as to make me uneasy, I will hasten to rejoin you, and woe to him of whom you shall have cause to complain to me." "Then, Emmanuel," said the young girl with hesitation, "it is your opinion that I should obey this invitation?" "Yes, Did not the messengers say your father's safety depended upon it? But what danger threatens him, then, Emmanuel? She asked. Emmanuel hesitated a moment, but his desire to make Julie decide immediately made him reply. Listen, he said. Today is the 5th of September, is it not? Yes. Today, then, at 11 o'clock, your father has nearly 300,000 francs to pay. Yes, we know that. Well, then, continued Emmanuel, we have not 15,000 francs in the house. What will happen then? Why, if today before 11 o'clock your father has not found someone who will come to his aid, he will be compelled at 12 o'clock to declare himself a bankrupt. Oh, come, then, come, cried she, hastening away with the young man. During this time, Madame Morel had told her son everything. The young man knew quite well that, after the succession of misfortunes which had befallen his father, great changes had taken place in the style of living and housekeeping. But he did not know that matters had reached such a point. He was thunderstruck. Then, rushing hastily out of the apartment, he ran upstairs, expecting to find his father in his study, but he rapped there in vain. While he was yet at the door of the study, he heard the bedroom door open, turned, and saw his father. Instead of going direct to his study, Morel had returned to his bedchamber, which he was only this moment quitting. Morel uttered a cry of surprise at the sight of his son, of whose arrival he was ignorant. He remained motionless on the spot, pressing with his left hand something he had concealed under his coat. Maximilian sprang down the staircase and threw his arms round his father's neck, but suddenly he recoiled and placed his right hand on Morel's breast. Father, he exclaimed, turning pale as death, what are you going to do with that brace of pistols under your coat? Oh, this is what I feared, said Morel. Father, father, in heaven's name, exclaimed the young man, what are these weapons for? Maximilian, replied Morel, looking fixedly at his son, you are a man and a man of honor. Come, and I will explain to you. And with a firm step Morel went up to his study, while Maximilian followed him, trembling as he went. Morel opened the door and closed it behind his son, then, crossing the anteroom, went to his desk on which he placed the pistols and pointed with his finger to an open ledger. In this ledger was made out an exact balance sheet of his affairs. Morel had to pay, within half an hour, 287,500 francs. All he possessed was 257 francs. Read, said Morel. The young man was overwhelmed as he read. Morel said not a word. What could he say? What need he add to such a desperate proof in figures? And have you done all that is possible, father, to meet this disastrous result? Asked the young man after a moment's pause. I have, replied Morel. You have no money coming in on which you can rely? None. You have exhausted every resource. All, and in half an hour, said Maximilian in a gloomy voice, our name is dishonored. Blood washes out dishonor, said Morel. You are right, father. I understand you. Then extending his hand towards one of the pistols, he said, there is one for you and one for me. Thanks. Morel caught his hand. Your mother, your sister, who will support them? A shudder ran through the young man's frame. Father, he said, do you reflect that you are bidding me to live? Yes, I do so bid you, answered Morel. It is your duty. You have a calm, strong mind, Maximilian. Maximilian, you are no ordinary man. I make no requests or commands. I only ask you to examine my position as if it were your own, and then judge for yourself. The young man reflected for a moment. Then an expression of sublime resignation appeared in his eyes, and with a slow and sad gesture he took off his 2 epaulettes, the insignia of his rank. Be it so, then, my father, he said, extending his hand to Morel. Die in peace, my father. I will live. Morel was about to cast himself on his knees before his son, but Maximilian caught him in his arms, and those two noble hearts were pressed against each other for a moment. "You know it is not my fault," said Morel. Maximilian smiled. "I know, father, you are the most honorable man I have ever known." "Good, my son, and now there is no more to be said. Go and rejoin your mother and sister." "My father," said the young man, bending his knee, "bless me." Morel took the head of his son between his two hands, drew him forward, and, kissing his forehead several times, said, "Oh, yes, yes, I bless you in my own name, and in the name of 3 generations of irreproachable men who say through me, the edifice which misfortune has destroyed, Providence may build up again. On seeing me die such a death, the most inexorable will have pity on you. To you, perhaps, they will accord the time they have refused to me. Then do your best to keep our name free from dishonor. Go to work, labor, young man, struggle ardently and courageously, live yourself, your mother and sister, with the most rigid economy, so that from day to day the property of those whom I leave in your hands may augment and fructify. Reflect how glorious a day it will be, how grand, how solemn, that day of complete restoration, on which you will say in this very office, my father died because he could not do what I have this day done, but he died calmly and peaceably, because in dying he knew what I should do." My father, cried the young man, "why should you not live?" "If I live, all would be changed. If I live, interest would be converted into doubt, pity into hostility. If I live, I am only a man who has broken his word, failed in his engagements, in fact, only a bankrupt. If, on the contrary, I die, remember, Maximilian, my corpse is that of an honest but unfortunate man. Living, my best friends would avoid my house. Dead, all Marseille will follow me in tears to my last home. Living, you would feel shame at my name. Dead, you may raise your head and say, I am the son of him you killed, because, for the first time, he has been compelled to break his word." The young man uttered a groan, but appeared resigned. "And now," said Morel, "leave me alone, and endeavor to keep your mother and sister away." "Will you not see my sister once more?" asked Maximilian. A last but final hope was concealed by the young man in the effect of this interview, and therefore he had suggested it. Morel shook his head. "I saw her this morning, and bade her adieu." "Have you no particular commands to leave with me, my father?" inquired Maximilian in a faltering voice. "Yes, my son, and a sacred command." "Say it, my father." "The house of Thomson and French is the only one who, from humanity, or, it may be, selfishness, it is not for me to read men's hearts, has had any pity for me. Its agent, who will in 10 minutes present himself to receive the amount of a bill of 287,500 francs, I will not say granted, but offered me 3 months. Let this house be the first repaid, my son, and respect this man." "Father, I will," said Maximilian. "And now, once more, adieu," said Morel. "Go, leave me. I would be alone. You will find my will in the secretary in my bedroom." The young man remained standing and motionless, having but the force of will and not the power of execution. "Hear me, Maximilian," said his father. "Suppose I was a soldier like you, and ordered to carry a certain redoubt, and you knew I must be killed in the assault, would you not say to me, as you said just now, 'Go, father, for you are dishonored by delay, and death is preferable to shame'?" "Yes, yes," said the young man, "yes," and once again embracing his father with convulsive pressure, he said, "Be it so, my father." And he rushed out of the study. When his son had left him, Morel remained an instant standing with his eyes fixed on the door. Then, putting forth his arm, he pulled the bell. After a moment's interval, Cockles appeared. It was no longer the same man. The fearful revelations of the 3 last days had crushed him. This thought, the house of Morel is about to stop payment, bent him to the earth more than 20 years would otherwise have done. My worthy Cockles, said Morel in a tone impossible to describe, do you remain in the antechamber when the gentleman who came 3 months ago, the agent of Thomson and French, arrives, announce his arrival to me. Cockles made no reply. He made a sign with his head, went into the anteroom, and seated himself. Morel fell back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the clock. There were 7 minutes left. That was all. The hand moved on with incredible rapidity. He seemed to see its motion. What passed in the mind of this man at the supreme moment of his agony cannot be told in words. He was still comparatively young. He was surrounded by the loving care of a devoted family, but he had convinced himself by a course of reasoning, illogical perhaps, yet certainly plausible, that he must separate himself from all he held dear in the world, evening life itself. To form the slightest idea of his feelings, one must have seen his face with its expression of enforced resignation and its tear-moistened eyes raised to heaven. The minute hand moved on. The pistols were loaded. He stretched forth his hand, took one up, and murmured his daughter's name. Then he laid it down, seized his pen, and wrote a few words. It seemed to him as if he had not taken a sufficient farewell of his beloved daughter. Then he turned again to the clock, counting time now not by minutes, but by seconds. He took up the deadly weapon again, his lips parted and his eyes fixed on the clock, and then shuddered at the click of the trigger as he cocked the pistol. At this moment of mortal anguish the cold sweat came forth upon his brow. A pang, stronger than death, clutched at his heartstrings. He heard the door of the staircase creak on its hinges. The clock gave its warning to strike 11. The door of his study opened. Morel did not turn round. He expected these words of Cockles, the agent of Thomson and French. He placed the muzzle of the pistol between his tests. Suddenly he heard a cry. It was his daughter's voice. He turned and saw Julie. The pistol fell from his hands. "My father," cried the young girl, out of breath, and half dead with joy. "Saved, you are saved." And she threw herself into his arms, holding in her extended hand a red, netted silk purse. "Saved, my child," said Morel. "What do you mean?" "Yes, saved, saved." See, said the young girl. Morel took the purse, and started as he did so, for a vague remembrance reminded him that it once belonged to himself. At one end was the receipted bill for the 287 francs, and at the other was a diamond, as large as a hazelnut, with these words on a small slip of parchment: "Julie's dowry." Morel passed his hand over his brow. It seemed to him a dream. At this moment the clock struck 11. He felt as if each stroke of the hammer fell upon his heart. "Explain, my child," he said. "Explain, my child," he said. "Explain. Where did you find this purse?" "In a house in the Elise de Malin, No. 15, on the corner of a mantelpiece in a small room on the 5th floor." "But," cried Morel, "this purse is not yours." Julie handed to her father the letter she had received in the morning. "And did you go alone?" asked Morel, after he had read it. "Emmanuel accompanied me, father. He was to have waited for me at the corner of the Rue de Musée, but, strange to say, he was not there when I returned." "Monsieur Morel!" exclaimed a voice on the stairs. "Monsieur Morel!" "It is his voice," said Julie. At this moment Emmanuel entered, his countenance full of animation and joy. "The Pharaon!" he cried. "The Pharaon!" What, the Pharaon? Are you mad, Emmanuel? You know the vessel is lost." "The Pharaon, sir. They signal the Pharaon. The Pharaon is entering the harbor." Morel fell back in his chair. His strength was failing him. His understanding, weakened by such events, refused to comprehend such incredible, unheard of, fabulous facts. But his son came in. "Father," cried Maximilian, "how could you say the Pharaon was lost?" "The lookout has signaled her, and they say she is now coming into port." "My dear friends," said Morel, "if this be so, it must be a miracle of heaven." "Impossible, impossible." but what was real and not less incredible was the purse he held in his hand. The acceptance receded, the splendid diamond. "Ah, sir," exclaimed Cockles, "what can it mean?" "The Pharaon." "Come, dear ones," said Morrel, rising from his seat, "let us go and see, and heaven have pity upon us if it be false intelligence." They all went out and on the stairs met Madame Morrel, who had been afraid to go up into the study. In a moment they were at the Canebière. There was a crowd on the pier. All the crowd gave way before Morrel. "The Pharaon," said every voice. And, wonderful to see, in front of the Tower of St. Jean was a ship bearing on her stern these words, printed in white letters: "The Pharaon, Morrel and son of Marseille." She was the exact duplicate of the other Pharaon, and loaded, as that had been, with cochineal and indigo. She cast anchor, clewed up sails, and on the deck was Captain Gaumard giving orders, and good old Penelon making signals to M. Morrel. To doubt any longer was impossible. There was the evidence of the senses and 10,000 persons who came to corroborate the testimony. As Morrel and his son embraced on the pier-head in the presence and amid the applause of the whole city witnessing this event, a man with his face half covered by a black beard, and who, concealed behind the sentry box, watched the scene with delight, uttered these words in a low tone: "Be happy, noble heart, be blessed for all the good you have done, and will do hereafter, and let my gratitude remain in obscurity like your good deeds." And with a smile expressive of supreme content, he left his hiding place, and without being observed, descended one of the flights of steps provided for debarkation, and hailing 3 times, shouted, "Jacopo, Jacopo, Jacopo." Then a launch came to shore, took him on board, and conveyed him to a yacht splendidly fitted up, on whose deck he sprung with the activity of a sailor. From there he once again looked towards Morrel, who, weeping with joy, was shaking hands most cordially with all the crowd around him, and thanking with a look the unknown benefactor whom he seemed to be seeking in the skies. "And now," said the unknown, "farewell kindness, humanity, and gratitude. Farewell to all the feelings that expand the heart." Chapter 31. Italy, Sinbad the Sailor. Towards the beginning of the year 1838, 2 young men belonging to the First Society of Paris, the Vicomte Albert de Morcerf and the Baron Franz d'Epinay, were at Florence. They had agreed to see the carnival at Rome that year, and that France, who for the last 3 or 4 years had inhabited Italy, should act as cicerone to Albert. As it is no inconsiderable affair to spend the carnival at Rome, especially when you have no great desire to sleep on the Piazza del Popolo or the Campo Vaccino, they wrote to Signor Pastrini, the proprietor of the Hotel de Londres, Piazza di Spagna, to reserve comfortable apartments for them. Signor Pastrini replied that he had only 2 rooms and a parlor on the 3rd floor, which he offered at the low charge of a louis per diem. They accepted his offer, but wishing to make the best use of the time that was left, Albert started for Naples. As for France, he remained at Florence, and after having passed a few days in exploring the paradise of the Cascine, and spending 2 or 3 evenings at the houses of the Florentine nobility, he took a fancy into his head, having already visited Corsica, the cradle of Bonaparte, to visit Elba, the waiting place of Napoleon. One evening he cast off the painter of a sailboat from the iron ring that secured it to the dock at Leghorn, wrapped himself in his coat, and lay down, and said to the crew, "To the island of Elba." The boat shot out of the harbor like a bird, and the next morning France disembarked at Porto Ferrajo. He traversed the island, after having followed the traces which the footsteps of the giant have left, and re-embarked for Marciana 2 hours after he again landed at Pianosa, where he was assured that red partridges abounded. The sport was bad. France only succeeded in killing a few partridges, and like every unsuccessful sportsman, he returned to the boat very much out of temper. "Ah, if your excellency chose," said the captain, "you may have capital sport." "Where? Do you see that island?" continued the captain, pointing to a conical pile rising from the Indigo Sea. "Well, what is this island?" "The island of Monte Cristo." "But I have no permission to shoot over this island." "Your excellency does not require a permit, for the island is uninhabited." "Ah, truly," said the young man. "A desert island in the mid of the Mediterranean must be a curiosity." "It is very natural. This island is a mass of rocks, and does not contain an acre of land capable of cultivation." "To whom does this island belong?" "To Tuscany." "What game shall I find there?" "Thousands of wild goats, who live upon the stones, I suppose," said France with an incredulous smile. "No, but by browsing the shrubs and trees that grow out of the crevices of the rocks." "Where can I sleep?" "On shore in the grottos, or on board in your cloak. Besides, if your excellency pleases, we can leave as soon as you like. We can sail as well by night as by day, and if the wind drops we can use our oars." As France had sufficient time, and his apartments at Rome were not yet available, he accepted the proposition. Upon his answer in the affirmative, the sailors exchanged a few words together in a low tone. "Well," asked he, "what now? Is there any difficulty in the way?" "No," replied the captain, "but we must warn your excellency that the island is an infected port." "What do you mean?" "Monte Cristo, although uninhabited, yet serves occasionally as a refuge for the smugglers and pirates who come from Corsica, Sardinia, and Africa, and if it becomes known that we have been there, we shall have to perform quarantine for 6 days on our return to Leghorn." "The deuce! That puts a different face on the matter." 6 days! Why, that's as long as the Almighty took to make the world. Too long, eh? Wait, too long. "But who will say your excellency has been to Monte Cristo?" "Oh, I shall not," cried France. Nor I," chorused the sailors. "Then steer for Monte Cristo." The captain gave his orders, the helm was put up, and the boat was soon sailing in the direction of the island. France waited until all was in order, and when the sail was filled and the 4 sailors had taken their places, 3 forward and 1 at the helm, he resumed the conversation. "Gitano," said he to the captain, "you tell me Monte Cristo serves as a refuge for pirates who are, it seems to me, a very different kind of game from the goats." "Yes, your excellency, and it is true. I knew there were smugglers, but I thought that since the capture of Algiers and the destruction of the Regency, pirates existed only in the romances of Cooper and Captain Marryat." "Your excellency is mistaken. There are pirates, like the bandits who were believed to have been exterminated by Pope Leo Roman XII and who yet, every day, rob travelers at the gates of Rome." "Has not your excellency heard that the French charge d'affaires was robbed 6 months ago within 500 paces of Velletri?" "Oh, yes, I heard that." "Well, then, if, like us, your excellency lived at Leghorn, you would hear, from time to time, that a little merchant vessel, or an English yacht that was expected at Bastia, at Porto Ferrajo, or at Civita Vecchia, has not arrived. No one knows what has become of it, but doubtless it has struck on a rock and foundered. Now this rock it has met has been a long and narrow boat, manned by 6 or 8 men, who have surprised and plundered it, some dark and stormy night, near some desert and gloomy island, as bandits plunder a carriage in the recesses of a forest." "But," asked France, who lay wrapped in his cloak at the bottom of the boat, "why do not those who have been plundered complain to the French, Sardinian, or Tuscan governments?" "Why?" said Gitano with a smile. "Yes, why? Because, in the first place, they transfer from the vessel to their own boat whatever they think worth taking. Then they bind the crew hand and foot. They attach to every one's neck a 24-pound ball, large hole is chopped in the vessel's bottom, and then they leave her. At the end of 10 minutes, the vessel begins to roll heavily and settle down. First one gunwale goes under, then the other. Then they lift and sink again, and both go under at once. All at once there's a noise like a cannon. That's the air blowing up the deck. Soon the water rushes out of the scupper holes like a whale spouting. The vessel gives a last groan, spins round, and disappears, forming a vast whirlpool in the ocean, and then all is over, so that in 5 minutes nothing but the eye of God can see the vessel where she lies at the bottom of the sea. Do you understand now, said the captain, why no complaints are made to the government, and why the vessel never reaches port? It is probable that if Gaetano had related this previous to proposing the expedition, France would have hesitated, but now that they had started, he thought it would be cowardly to draw back. He was one of those men who do not rashly court danger, but if danger presents itself, combat it with the most unalterable coolness. Calm and resolute, he treated any peril as he would an adversary in a duel, calculated its probable method of approach, retreated, if at all, as a point of strategy and not from cowardice, was quick to see an opening for attack, and won victory at a single thrust. Bah, said he, I have traveled through Sicily and Calabria. I have sailed 2 months in the archipelago, and yet I never saw evening the shadow of a bandit or a pirate. I did not tell your excellency this to deter you from your project, replied Gaetano, but you questioned me, and I have answered. That's all. Yes, and your conversation is most interesting, and as I wish to enjoy it as long as possible, steer for Monte Cristo. The wind blew strongly, the boat made 6 or 7 knots an hour, and they were rapidly reaching the end of their voyage. As they drew near, the island seemed to lift from the sea, and the air was so clear that they could already distinguish the rocks heaped on one another, like cannon balls in an arsenal, with green bushes and trees growing in the crevices. As for the sailors, although they appeared perfectly tranquil, yet it was evident that they were on the alert, and that they carefully watched the glassy surface over which they were sailing, and on which a few fishing boats, with their white sails, were alone visible. They were within 15 miles of Monte Cristo when the sun began to set behind Corsica, whose mountains appeared against the sky, showing their rugged peaks in bold relief. This mass of rock, like the giant Adamastor, rose dead ahead, a formidable barrier, and intercepting the light that gilded its massive peaks so that the voyagers were in shadow. Little by little, the shadow rose higher and seemed to drive before it the last rays of the expiring day. At last the reflection rested on the summit of the mountain, where it paused an instant, like the fiery crest of a volcano. Then gloom gradually covered the summit as it had covered the base, and the island now only appeared to be a gray mountain that grew continually darker. Half an hour after, the night was quite dark. Fortunately, the mariners were used to these latitudes and knew every rock in the Tuscan archipelago, for in the amid of this obscurity France was not without uneasiness. Corsica had long since disappeared, and Monte Cristo itself was invisible, but the sailors seemed, like the lynx, to see in the dark, and the pilot who steered did not evince the slightest hesitation. An hour had passed since the sun had set, when France fancied he saw, at a quarter of a mile to the left, a dark mass, but he could not precisely make out what it was, and fearing to excite the mirth of the sailors by mistaking a floating cloud for land, he remained silent. Suddenly a great light appeared on the strand. Land may resemble a cloud, but the fire was not a meteor. What is this light? Asked he. Hush, said the captain, it is a fire. But you told me the island was uninhabited. I said there were no fixed habitations on it, but I said also that it served sometimes as a harbor for smugglers. And for pirates. And for pirates, returned Gaetano, repeating France's words. It is for that reason I have given orders to pass the island, for, as you see, the fire is behind us. But this fire, continued France, It seems to me rather reassuring than otherwise. Men who did not wish to be seen would not light a fire. Oh, that goes for nothing, said Gitano. If you can guess the position of the island in the darkness, you will see that the fire cannot be seen from the side or from Pianosa, but only from the sea. You think, then, this fire indicates the presence of unpleasant neighbors? That is what we must find out, returned Gitano, fixing his eyes on this terrestrial star. How can you find out? You shall see. Gitano consulted with his companions, and after 5 minutes' discussion, a maneuver was executed which caused the vessel to tack about. They returned the way they had come, and in a few minutes the fire disappeared, hidden by an elevation of the land. The pilot again changed the course of the boat, which rapidly approached the island and was soon within 50 paces of it. Gitano lowered the sail, and the boat came to rest. All this was done in silence, and from the moment that their course was changed not a word was spoken. Gitano, who had proposed the expedition, had taken all the responsibility on himself. The 4 sailors fixed their eyes on him, while they got out their oars and held themselves in readiness to row away, which, thanks to the darkness, would not be difficult. As for France, he examined his arms with the utmost coolness. He had 2 double-barreled guns and a rifle. He loaded them, looked at the priming, and waited quietly. During this time the captain had thrown off his vest and shirt, and secured his trousers round his waist. His feet were naked, so he had no shoes and stockings to take off. After these preparations he placed his finger on his lips, and lowering himself noiselessly into the sea, swam towards the shore with such precaution that it was impossible to hear the slightest sound. He could only be traced by the phosphorescent line in his wake. This track soon disappeared. It was evident that he had touched the shore. Every one on board remained motionless for half an hour, when the same luminous track was again observed, and the swimmer was soon on board. Well, exclaimed France and the sailors in unison. They are Spanish smugglers, said he. They have with them 2 Corsican bandits. And what are these Corsican bandits doing here with Spanish smugglers? Alas, returned the captain with an accent of the most profound pity, we ought always to help one another. Very often the bandits are hard pressed by gendarmes or carbineers. Well, they see a vessel, and good fellows like us on board. They come and demand hospitality of us. You can't refuse help to a poor hunted devil. We receive them, and for greater security we stand out to sea. This costs us nothing and saves the life, or at least the liberty, of a fellow creature, who on the first occasion returns the service by pointing out some safe spot where we can land our goods without interruption. Ah, said France, then you are a smuggler occasionally. Gitano, your excellency, we must live somehow, returned the other, smiling impenetrably. Then you know the men who are now on Monte Cristo? Oh, yes, we sailors are like Freemasons and recognize each other by signs. And do you think we have nothing to fear if we land? Nothing at all. Smugglers are not thieves. But these 2 Corsican bandits, said France, calculating the chances of peril. It is not their fault that they are bandits, but that of the authorities. How so? Because they are pursued for having made a stiff, as if it was not in a Corsican's nature to revenge himself. What do you mean by having made a stiff? Having assassinated a man, said France, continuing his investigation. I mean that they have killed an enemy, which is a very different thing, returned the captain. Well, said the young man, let us demand hospitality of these smugglers and bandits. Do you think they will grant it? Without doubt. How many are they? 4, and the 2 bandits make 6, just our number, so that if they prove troublesome, we shall be able to hold them in check. So, for the last time, steer to Monte Cristo. Yes, but your excellency will permit us to take all due precautions. By all means, be as wise as Nestor and as prudent as Ulysses. I do more than permit, I exhort you. Silence, then, said Gaetano. Every one obeyed. For a man who, like France, viewed his position in its true light, it was a grave one. He was alone in the darkness with sailors whom he did not know, and who had no reason to be devoted to him, who knew that he had several thousand francs in his belt, and who had often examined his weapons, which were very beautiful, if not with envy, at least with curiosity. On the other hand, he was about to land, without any other escort than these men, on an island which had, truly, a very religious name, but which did not seem to France likely to afford him much hospitality, thanks to the smugglers and bandits. The history of the scuttled vessels, which had appeared improbable during the day, seemed very probable at night. Placed as he was between two possible sources of danger, he kept his eye on the crew, and his gun in his hand. The sailors had again hoisted sail, and the vessel was once more cleaving the waves. Through the darkness France, whose eyes were now more accustomed to it, could see the looming shore along which the boat was sailing, and then, as they rounded a rocky point, he saw the fire more brilliant than ever, and about it 5 or 6 persons seated. The blaze illumined the sea for 100 paces around. Gaetano skirted the light, carefully keeping the boat in the shadow. Then, when they were opposite the fire, he steered to the center of the circle, singing a fishing song, of which his companions sung the chorus. At the first words of the song, the men seated round the fire arose and approached the landing place, their eyes fixed on the boat, evidently seeking to know who the newcomers were and what were their intentions. They soon appeared satisfied and returned, with the exception of one who remained at the shore to their fire, at which the carcass of a goat was roasting. When the boat was within 20 paces of the shore, the man on the beach, who carried a carbine, presented arms after the manner of a sentinel, and cried, "Who comes there?" In Sardinian. France coolly cocked both barrels. Gaetano then exchanged a few words with this man, which the traveler did not understand, but which evidently concerned him. "Will your excellency give your name, or remain incognito?" asked the captain. "My name must rest unknown. Merely say I am a Frenchman traveling for pleasure." As soon as Gaetano had transmitted this answer, the sentinel gave an order to one of the men seated round the fire, who rose and disappeared among the rocks. Not a word was spoken. Every one seemed occupied, France with his disembarkment, the sailors with their sails, the smugglers with their goat. But in the amid of all this carelessness, it was evident that they mutually observed each other. The man who had disappeared returned suddenly on the opposite side to that by which he had left. He made a sign with his head to the sentinel, who, turning to the boat, said "Assaccamodi." The Italian "Assaccamodi" is untranslatable. It means at once, "Come, enter, you are welcome, make yourself at home, you are the master." It is like that Turkish phrase of Molière's that so astonished the bourgeois gentleman by the number of things implied in its utterance. The sailors did not wait for a second invitation. 4 strokes of the oar brought them to land. Gaetano sprang to shore, exchanged a few words with the sentinel, then his comrades disembarked, and lastly came France. One of his guns was swung over his shoulder. Gaetano had the other, and a sailor held his rifle. His dress, half artist, half dandy, did not excite any suspicion, and consequently no disquietude. The boat was moored to the shore, and they advanced a few paces to find a comfortable bivouac. But, doubtless, the spot they chose did not suit the smuggler who filled the post of sentinel, for he cried out, "Not that way, if you please." Gaetano faltered an excuse, and advanced to the opposite side, while 2 sailors kindled torches at the fire to light them on their way. They advanced about 30 paces, and then stopped at a small esplanade, surrounded with rocks, in which seats had been cut, not unlike sentry boxes. Around in the crevices of the rocks grew a few dwarf oaks and thick bushes of myrtles. France lowered a torch and saw by the mass of cinders that had accumulated that he was not the first to discover this retreat, which was doubtless one of the halting places of the wandering visitors of Monte Cristo. As for his suspicions, once on terra firma, once that he had seen the indifferent, if not friendly, appearance of his hosts, his anxiety had quite disappeared, or rather, at sight of the goat, had turned to appetite. He mentioned this to Gaetano, who replied that nothing could be more easy than to prepare a supper when they had in their boat bread, wine, half a dozen partridges, and a good fire to roast them by. Besides, added he, if the smell of their roast meat tempts you, I will go and offer them two of our birds for a slice. You are a born diplomat, returned France. Go and try. Meanwhile the sailors had collected dried sticks and branches with which they made a fire. France waited impatiently, inhaling the aroma of the roasted meat, when the captain returned with a mysterious air. Well, said France, anything new? Do they refuse? On the contrary, returned Gaetano, the chief, who was told you were a young Frenchman, invites you to sup with him. Well, observed France, this chief is very polite, and I see no objection, the more so as I bring my share of the supper. Oh, it is not that, he has plenty and to spare for supper, but he makes one condition, and rather a peculiar one, before he will receive you at his house. His house? Has he built one here, then? No, but he has a very comfortable one all the same, so they say. You know this chief, then? I have heard talk of him, favorably or otherwise. Both. The deuce! And what is this condition? That you are blindfolded, and do not take off the bandage until he himself bids you. France looked at Gaetano, to see, if possible, what he thought of this proposal. Ah, replied he, guessing France's thought, I know this is a serious matter. What should you do in my place? I, who have nothing to lose, I should go. You would accept? Yes, were it only out of curiosity. There is something very peculiar about this chief. Then, listen, said Gaetano, lowering his voice. I do not know if what they say is true. He stopped to see if any one was near. What do they say? That this chief inhabits a cavern to which the Pity Palace is nothing. What nonsense, said France, reseating himself. It is no nonsense, it is quite true, the pilot of the Saint Ferdinand went in once, and he came back amazed, vowing that such treasures were only to be heard of in fairy tales. Do you know, observed France, that with such stories you make me think of Ali Baba's enchanted cavern? I tell you what I have been told. Then you advise me to accept? Oh, I don't say that. Your Excellency will do as you please. I should be sorry to advise you in the matter. France pondered the matter for a few moments, concluded that a man so rich could not have any intention of plundering him of what little he had, and seeing only the prospect of a good supper, accepted. Gaetano departed with a reply. France was prudent, and wished to learn all he possibly could concerning his host. He turned towards the sailor, who, during this dialogue, had sat gravely, plucking the partridges with the air of a man proud of his office, and asked him how these men had landed, as no vessel of any kind was visible. Never mind that, returned the sailor, I know their vessel. Is it a very beautiful vessel? I would not wish for a better to sail round the world. Of what burden is she? About 100 tons, but she is built to stand any weather. She is what the English call a yacht. Where was she built? I know not, but my own opinion is she is a Genos. And how did a leader of smugglers, continued France, venture to build a vessel designed for such a purpose at Genoa? I did not say that the owner was a smuggler, replied the sailor. No, but Gaetano did. I thought Gaetano had only seen the vessel from a distance. He had not then spoken to any one. And if this person be not a smuggler, who is he? A wealthy signor, who travels for his pleasure. Come, thought France, he is still more mysterious, since the two accounts do not agree. What is his name? If you ask him, he says Sinbad the Sailor, but I doubt if it be his real name. Sinbad the Sailor? Yes. And where does he reside? On the sea. What country does he come from? I do not know. Have you ever seen him? Sometimes. What sort of a man is he? Your Excellency will judge for yourself. Where will he receive me? No doubt in the subterranean palace Gitano told you of. Have you never had the curiosity, when you have landed and found this island deserted, to seek for this enchanted palace? Oh, yes, more than once, but always in vain. We examined the grotto all over, but we never could find the slightest trace of any opening. They say that the door is not opened by a key, but a magic word. Decidedly, muttered Franz, this is an Arabian Nights adventure. His Excellency waits for you, said a voice, which he recognized as that of the sentinel. He was accompanied by 2 of the yacht's crew. Franz drew his handkerchief from his pocket and presented it to the man who had spoken to him. Without uttering a word, they bandaged his eyes with a care that showed their apprehensions of his committing some indiscretion. Afterwards he was made to promise that he would not make the least attempt to raise the bandage. He promised. Then his 2 guides took his arms and he went on, guided by them and preceded by the sentinel. After going about 30 paces, he smelled the appetizing odor of the kid that was roasting, and knew thus that he was passing the bivouac. They then led him on about 50 paces farther, evidently advancing towards that part of the shore where they would not allow Gitano to go, a refusal he could now comprehend. Soon, by a change in the atmosphere, he knew that they were entering a cave. After going on for a few seconds more, he heard a crackling, and it seemed to him as though the atmosphere again changed and became balmy and perfumed. At length his feet touched on a thick and soft carpet, and his guides let go their hold of him. There was a moment's silence, and then a voice, in excellent French, although with a foreign accent, said, "Welcome, sir. I beg you will remove your bandage." It may be supposed, then, Franz did not wait for a repetition of this permission, but took off the handkerchief and found himself in the presence of a man from 38 to 40 years of age, dressed in a Tunisian costume, that is to say, a red cap with a long blue silk tassel, a vest of black cloth, embroidered with gold, pantaloons of deep red, large and full gaiters, of the same color, embroidered with gold like the vest, and yellow slippers. He had a splendid cashmere round his waist, and a small, sharp, and crooked cangiar was passed through his girdle. Although of a paleness that was almost livid, this man had a remarkably handsome face. His eyes were penetrating and sparkling, his nose, quite straight and projecting direct from the brow, was of the pure Greek type, while his teeth, as white as pearls, were set off to admiration by the black mustache that encircled them. His pallor was so peculiar that it seemed to pertain to one who had been long entombed and who was incapable of resuming the healthy glow and hue of life. He was not particularly tall, but extremely well made, and, like the men of the South, had small hands and feet. But what astonished Franz, who had treated Gitano's description as a fable, was the splendor of the apartment in which he found himself. The entire chamber was lined with crimson brocade worked with flowers of gold. In a recess was a kind of divan, surmounted with a stand of Arabian swords, in silver scabbards, and the handles resplendent with gems. From the ceiling hung a lamp of Venetian glass of beautiful shape and color, while the feet rested on a Turkey carpet, in which they sunk to the instep. Tapestry hung before the door by which Franz had entered, and also in front of another door, leading into a second apartment which seemed to be brilliantly illuminated. The host gave Franz time to recover from his surprise, and moreover returned look for look, not even taking his eyes off him. "Sir," he said, after a pause, "1,000 excuses for the precaution taken in your introduction here, but as during the greater portion of the year this island is deserted, if the secret of this abode were discovered, I should doubtless find on my return my temporary retirement in a state of great disorder, which would be exceedingly annoying, not for the loss it occasioned me, but because I should not of the certainty I now possess of separating myself from all the rest of mankind at pleasure. Let me now endeavor to make you forget this temporary unpleasantness, and offer you what no doubt you did not expect to find here, that is to say, a tolerable supper and pretty comfortable beds. Ma foi, my dear sir, replied France, make no apologies. I have always observed that they bandage people's eyes who penetrate enchanted palaces, for instance, those of Real and the Huguenots, and really, I have nothing to complain of, for what I see makes me think of the wonders of the Arabian Nights. Alas, I may say with Lucullus, if I could have anticipated the honor of your visit, I would have prepared for it. But such as is my hermitage, it is at your disposal. Such as is my supper, it is yours to share, if you will. Ollie, is the supper ready? At this moment the tapestry moved aside, and a Nubian, black as ebony, and dressed in a plain white tunic, made a sign to his master that all was prepared in the dining room. Now, said the unknown to France, I do not know if you are of my opinion, but I think nothing is more annoying than to remain 2 or 3 hours together without knowing by name or appellation how to address one another. Pray observe that I too much respect the laws of hospitality to ask your name or title. I only request you to give me one, by which I may have the pleasure of addressing you. As for myself, that I may put you at your ease, I tell you that I am generally called Sinbad the Sailor. And I, replied France, will tell you, as I only require his wonderful lamp to make me precisely like Aladdin, that I see no reason why at this moment I should not be called Aladdin. That will keep us from going away from the East, where I am tempted to think I have been conveyed by some good genius. Well, then, Signor Aladdin, replied the singular amphitryon, you heard our repast announced. Will you now take the trouble to enter the dining room, your humble servant going first to show the way? At these words, moving aside the tapestry, Sinbad preceded his guest. France now looked upon another scene of enchantment. The table was splendidly covered, and once convinced of this important point he cast his eyes around him. The dining room was scarcely less striking than the room he had just left. It was entirely of marble, with antique bas-reliefs of priceless value, and at the 4 corners of this apartment, which was oblong, were 4 magnificent statues having baskets in their hands. These baskets contained 4 pyramids of most splendid fruit. There were Sicily pineapples, pomegranates from Malaga, oranges from the Balearic Isles, peaches from France, and dates from Tunis. The supper consisted of a roast pheasant garnished with Corsican blackbirds, a boar's ham with jelly, a quarter of a kid with tartar sauce, a glorious turbot, and a gigantic lobster. Between these large dishes were smaller ones, containing various dainties. The dishes were of silver and the plates of Japanese china. France rubbed his eyes in order to assure himself that this was not a dream. Ali alone was present to wait at table, and acquitted himself so admirably that the guest complimented his host upon that. Yes, replied he, while he did the honors of the supper with much ease and grace. Yes, he is a poor devil who is much devoted to me, and does all he can to prove it. He remembers that I saved his life, and as he has a regard for his head, he feels some gratitude towards me for having kept it on his shoulders. Ali approached his master, took his hand, and kissed it. Would it be impertinent, Signor Sinbad, said France, to ask you the particulars of this kindness? Oh, they are simple enough, replied the host. It seems the fellow had been caught wandering nearer to the harem of the Bey of Tunis than etiquette permits to one of his color, and he was condemned by the Bey to have his tongue cut out, and his hand and head cut off. The tongue the first day, the hand the second, and the head the third. I always had a desire to have a mute in my service, so learning the day his tongue was cut out, I went to the bay and proposed to give him for Ali a splendid double-barreled gun which I knew he was very desirous of having. He hesitated a moment. He was so very desirous to complete the poor devil's punishment. But when I added to the gun an English cutlass, with which I had shivered his highness's yataghan to pieces, the bay yielded and agreed to forgive the hand and head, but on condition that the poor fellow never again set foot in Tunis. This was a useless clause in the bargain, for whenever the coward sees the first glimpse of the shores of Africa, he runs down below and can only be induced to appear again when we are out of sight of that quarter of the globe. France remained a moment silent and pensive, hardly knowing what to think of the half-kindness, half-cruelty with which his host related the brief narrative. And like the celebrated sailor whose name you have assumed, he said, by way of changing the conversation, you pass your life in traveling. Yes, I made a vow at a time when I little thought I should ever be able to accomplish it, said the unknown with a singular smile, and I made some others also which I hope I may fulfill in due season. Although Sinbad pronounced these words with much calmness, his eyes gave forth gleams of extraordinary ferocity. You have suffered a great deal, sir? Said France inquiringly. Sinbad started and looked fixedly at him as he replied, What makes you suppose so? Everything, answered France, your voice, your look, your pallid complexion, and evening the life you lead. I live the happiest life possible, the real life of a pasha. I am king of all creation. I am pleased with one place and stay there. I get tired of it and leave it. I am free as a bird and have wings like one. My attendants obey my slightest wish. Sometimes I amuse myself by delivering some bandit or criminal from the bonds of the law. Then I have my mode of dispensing justice, silent and sure, without respite or appeal, which condemns or pardons, and which no one sees. Ah, if you had tasted my life, you would not desire any other, and would never return to the world unless you had some great project to accomplish there. Revenge, for instance, observed France. The unknown fixed on the young man one of those looks which penetrate into the depth of the heart and thoughts. And why revenge? He asked. Because, replied France, you seem to me like a man who, persecuted by society, has a fearful account to settle with it. Ah, responded Sinbad, laughing with his singular laugh which displayed his white and sharp teeth. You have not guessed rightly. Such as you see me, I am a sort of philosopher, and one day perhaps I shall go to Paris to rival Monsieur Apert and the little man in the blue cloak. And will that be the first time you ever took that journey? Yes, it will. I must seem to you by no means curious, but I assure you that it is not my fault I have delayed it so long. It will happen one day or the other. And do you propose to make this journey very shortly? I do not know. It depends on circumstances which depend on certain arrangements. I should like to be there at the time you come, and I will endeavor to repay you as far as lies in my power for your liberal hospitality displayed to me at Monte Cristo. I should avail myself of your offer with pleasure, replied the host, but, unfortunately, if I go there, it will be, in all probability, incognito. The supper appeared to have been supplied solely for France, for the unknown scarcely touched one or two dishes of the splendid banquet to which his guest did ample justice. Then Ali brought on the dessert, or rather took the baskets from the hands of the statues and placed them on the table. Between the two baskets he placed a small silver cup with a silver cover. The care with which Ali placed this cup on the table roused France's curiosity. He raised the cover and saw a kind of greenish paste, something like preserved angelica, but which was perfectly unknown to him. He replaced the lid, as ignorant of what the cup contained as he was before he had looked at it, and then casting his eyes towards his host he saw him smile at his disappointment. You cannot guess, said he, what there is in that small vase, can you? No, I really cannot. Well, then, that green preserve is nothing less than the ambrosia which he served at the table of Jupiter. But, replied France, this ambrosia, no doubt, in passing through mortal hands has lost its heavenly appellation and assumed a human name. In vulgar phrase, what may you term this composition, for which, to tell the truth, I do not feel any particular desire? Ah, thus it is that our material origin is revealed, cried Sinbad. We frequently pass so near to happiness without seeing, without regarding it, or if we do see and regard it, yet without recognizing it. Are you a man for the substantials, and is gold your god? Taste this, and the mines of Peru, Gujarat, and Golconda are open to you. Are you a man of imagination, a poet? Taste this, and the boundaries of possibility disappear. The fields of infinite space open to you. You advance free in heart, free in mind, into the boundless realms of unfettered reverie. Ah, you ambitious, and do you seek after the greatnesses of the earth? Taste this, and in an hour you will be a king, not a king of a petty kingdom, hidden in some corner of Europe like France, Spain, or England, but king of the world, king of the universe, king of creation. Without bowing at the feet of Satan, you will be king and master of all the kingdoms of the earth. Is it not tempting what I offer you? And is it not an easy thing, since it is only to do thus? Look, at these words he uncovered the small cup which contained the substance so lauded, took a teaspoonful of the magic sweetmeat, raised it to his lips, and swallowed it slowly with his eyes half shut and his head bent backwards. France did not disturb him whilst he absorbed his favorite sweetmeat. But when he had finished, he inquired, "What, then, is this precious stuff?" "Did you ever hear," he replied, "of the old man of the mountain who attempted to assassinate Philip Augustus?" "Of course I have." "Well, you know he reigned over a rich valley which was overhung by the mountain from where he derived his picturesque name. In this valley were magnificent gardens planted by Hassan ben Sabah, and in these gardens, isolated pavilions. Into these pavilions he admitted the elect, and there, says Marco Polo, gave them to eat a certain herb, which transported them to paradise, in the amid of ever-blooming shrubs, ever-ripe fruit, and ever-lovely virgins. What these happy persons took for reality was but a dream, but it was a dream so soft, so voluptuous, so enthralling, that they sold themselves body and soul to him who gave it to them, and obedient to his orders as to those of a deity, struck down the designated victim, died in torture without a murmur, believing that the death they underwent was but a quick transition to that life of delights of which the holy herb, now before you, had given them a slight foretaste. "Then," cried France, "it is hashish. I know that, by name at least." "That is it precisely, Signor Aladdin. It is hashish, the purest and most unadulterated hashish of Alexandria, the hashish of Abu Ghor, the celebrated maker, the only man, the man to whom there should be built a palace inscribed with these words, a grateful world to the dealer in happiness." "Do you know," said France, "I have a very great inclination to judge for myself of the truth or exaggeration of your eulogies. Judge for yourself, Signor Aladdin, judge, but do not confine yourself to one trial. Like everything else, we must habituate the senses to a fresh impression, gentle or violent, sad or joyous. There is a struggle in nature against this divine substance, in nature which is not made for joy and clings to pain. Nature subdued must yield in the combat. The dream must succeed to reality, and then the dream reigns supreme. Then the dream becomes life, and life becomes the dream. But what changes occur? It is only by comparing the pains of actual being with the joys of the assumed existence that you would desire to live no longer, but to dream thus forever. When you return to this mundane sphere from your visionary world, you would seem to leave a Neapolitan spring for a Lapland winter, to quit paradise for earth, heaven for hell. Taste the hashish, guest of mine, taste the hashish. France's only reply was to take a teaspoonful of the marvelous preparation, about as much in quantity as his host had eaten, and lift it to his mouth. Diable, he said, after having swallowed the divine preserve. I do not know if the result will be as agreeable as you describe, but the thing does not appear to me as palatable as you say, because your palate has not yet been attuned to the sublimity of the substances it flavors. Tell me, the first time you tasted oysters, tea, porter, truffles, and sundry other dainties which you now adore, did you like them? Could you comprehend how the Romans stuffed their pheasants with the saphitida, and the Chinese eat swallows' nests? Eh? No. Well, it is the same with hashish. Only eat for a week, and nothing in the world will seem to you to equal the delicacy of its flavor, which now appears to you flat and distasteful. Let us now go into the adjoining chamber, which is your apartment, and Ollie will bring us coffee and pipes. They both arose, and while he who called himself Sinbad, and whom we have occasionally named so, that we may, like his guest, have some title by which to distinguish him, gave some orders to the servant, France entered still another apartment. It was simply yet richly furnished. It was round, and a large divan completely encircled it. Divan, walls, ceiling, floor were all covered with magnificent skins as soft and downy as the richest carpets. There were heavy-maned lion skins from Atlas, striped tiger skins from Bengal, panther skins from the Cape, spotted beautifully like those that appeared to Dante, bear skins from Siberia, fox skins from Norway, and so on. And all these skins were strewn in profusion one on the other, so that it seemed like walking over the most mossy turf, or reclining on the most luxurious bed. Both laid themselves down on the divan. Chibouks with jasmine tubes and amber mouthpieces were within reach, and all prepared so that there was no need to smoke the same pipe twice. Each of them took one, which Ollie lighted, and then retired to prepare the coffee. There was a moment's silence, during which Sinbad gave himself up to thoughts that seemed to occupy him incessantly, evening in the amid of his conversation, and France abandoned himself to that mute reverie into which we always sink when smoking excellent tobacco, which seems to remove with its fume all the troubles of the mind, and to give the smoker in exchange all the visions of the soul. Ollie brought in the coffee. How do you take it? Inquired the unknown, in the French or Turkish style, strong or weak, sugar or none, cool or boiling? As you please, it is ready in all ways. I will take it in the Turkish style, replied France. And you are right, said his host. It shows you have a tendency for an oriental life. Ah, those Orientals, they are the only men who know how to live. As for me, he added, with one of those singular smiles which did not escape the young man, when I have completed my affairs in Paris, I shall go and die in the East, and should you wish to see me again, you must seek me at Cairo, Baghdad, or Ispahan. Ma foi, said France, it would be the easiest thing in the world, for I feel eagle's wings springing out at my shoulders, and with those wings I could make a tour of the world in 24 hours. Ah, yes, the hashish is beginning its work. Well, unfurl your wings, and fly into superhuman regions. Fear nothing. There is a watch over you, and if your wings, like those of Icarus, melt before the sun, we are here to ease your fall. He then said something in Arabic to Ollie, who made a sign of obedience and withdrew, but not to any distance. As to France, a strange transformation had taken place in him. All the bodily fatigue of the day, all the preoccupation of mind which the events of the evening had brought on, disappeared as they do at the first approach of sleep, when we are still sufficiently conscious to be aware of the coming of slumber. His body seemed to acquire an airy lightness, his perception brightened in a remarkable manner, his senses seemed to redouble their power. The horizon continued to expand, but it was not the gloomy horizon of vague alarms, and which he had seen before he slept, but a blue, transparent, unbounded horizon, with all the blue of the ocean, all the spangles of the sun, all the perfumes of the summer breeze. Then, in the amid of the songs of his sailors, songs so clear and sonorous that they would have made a divine harmony had their notes been taken down, he saw the island of Monte Cristo no longer as a threatening rock in the amid of the waves, but as an oasis in the desert. Then, as his boat drew nearer, the songs became louder, for an enchanting and mysterious harmony rose to heaven, as if some lordly had decreed to attract a soul there, or Amphion, the enchanter, intended there to build a city. At length the boat touched the shore, but without effort, without shock, as lips touch lips, and he entered the grotto amidst continued strains of most delicious melody. He descended, or rather seemed to descend, several steps, inhaling the fresh and balmy air, like that which may be supposed to reign around the grotto of Circe, formed from such perfumes as set the mind a-dreaming, and such fires as burn the very senses. And he saw again all he had seen before his sleep, from Sinbad his singular host to Ali, the mute attendant. Then all seemed to fade away and become confused before his eyes, like the last shadows of the magic lantern before it is extinguished, and he was again in the chamber of statues, lighted only by one of those pale and antique lamps which watch, in the dead of the night, over the sleep of pleasure. They were the same statues, rich in form, in attraction and pose, with eyes of fascination, smiles of love, and bright and flowing hair. They were Phryne, Cleopatra, Messalina, those three celebrated courtesans. Then, among them glided like a pure ray, like a Christian angel in the amid of Olympus, one of those chaste figures, those calm shadows, those soft visions, which seemed to veil its virgin brow before these marble wantons. Then the three statues advanced towards him with looks of love, and approached the couch on which he was reposing, their feet hidden in their long white tunics, their throats bare, hair flowing like waves, and assuming attitudes which the gods could not resist, but which saints withstood, and looks inflexible and ardent like those with which the serpent charms the bird. And then he gave way before looks that held him in a torturing grasp and delighted his senses as with a voluptuous kiss. It seemed to France that he closed his eyes, and in a last look about him, saw the vision of modesty completely veiled, and then followed a dream of passion like that promised by the prophet to the elect. Lips of stone turned to flame, breasts of ice became like heated lava, so that to France, yielding for the first time to the sway of the drug, love was a sorrow and voluptuousness a torture, as burning mouths were pressed to his thirsty lips, and he was held in cool serpent-like embraces.